Hey sailors, welcome to the crew. I'm Sailor Janda, and this is my Let's Play of Rule the Waves 3 as the United States. This is the 1940 special, in which we'll be taking a look at all of the ships presently in use by the major powers of the world as we enter the historic World War II era. Obviously, it's an era of transition with the sort of last great hurrah of the battleships, battle cruiser, the gun-armed capital ships, and the arrival of the carriers. So at present, as we arrive in this date, there's definitely less battleships than there were a decade ago, and less battle cruisers too, but a lot more carriers. The smallest fleet in the world is just uh, it's Russia, actually. Just Russia by 3,000 tons behind Spain. Then looks like Italy, France, Austria-Hungary has managed to make its way to 5th somehow. Then Japan, Germany, the USA, and Britain. Britain still leads by 100,000 tons, but um, it's at an outright disadvantage in gun-armed capital ships. Even, or maybe, I don't know, carriers deserve analysis. The main area it's ahead in is heavy cruisers and destroyers. Anyway, let's take a good look, starting with destroyers. Russia has managed to have only 38 of those in service at this point, which don't really even amount to the 73,000 tons they claim because almost half of their fleet is building, which is pretty much the case across their whole fleet, to be fair. They have some of these old Boignies, which make 32 knots and have 4 4-inch guns with just 2 twin torpedo tubes. They have Zvoys, on which they managed to cram 2 6-inch guns and probably 2 triple torpedo tubes. Varanies with 2 4-inch guns and 2 triple torpedo tubes. Not their most modern designs. They have Sposobnies with 3 4-inch guns, 2 triple torpedo tubes, and their most modern design is the Bespashchodny class with 4 5-inch guns, 35 knots, 2 quadruple torpedo tubes. These are the first that they've built that are even sort of remotely close to what America uses as standard. And honestly, they're still clearly inferior. And they only have, what, 7 of them? Yeah. Russia's destroyer force is an absolute shambles. Spain has 44 destroyers, amounting to about 80,000 tons, so that's somewhat more. However, the better portion of them, well, they have a good portion of 25-year-old destroyers with 2 4-inch guns, 2 triple torpedo tubes. They have a collection of 3 5-inch gun destroyers with 2 or 3 triple torpedo tubes. They went back to 3 4-inch guns and smaller more recently. The very latest have 4 5-inch guns and 2 quadruple torpedo tubes, probably. It could be 4 twins as well, I can't really see. But look, these are their latest destroyers. They're a decade old, and they're clearly inferior to American destroyers. Spain is also no threat in the destroyer department. Who did I say? Italy has 59 destroyers amounting to 100,000 tons, of which they have some old destroyers with 2 4-inch guns and 2 triple torpedo tubes of the Euro class. They built a couple with just 2 5-inch guns, but 3 triple tubes. And then they had several classes with either 2 4-inch or 3 4-inch guns and 2 triple tubes. Most recently, not most recently, but they have several classes with 4 5-inch guns and 2 quadruple tubes, which at least is a little more respectable. Most recently, they've been building 6 4-inch guns, 2 quadruple tubes. Apparently, they just launched a couple of destroyers with 3 6-inch 4 4-inch guns, 2 quadruple tubes. I'm not exactly sure how this armament compares to having 8 5-inch guns, but for logistical reasons, if nothing else, I think I would rather have 8 5-inch guns. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's actually still a heavier way to fire anyway. France has 59 destroyers, amounting to just under 100,000 tons. They have a few older examples with some of these have two 4-inch guns and two twin tubes, two 5-inch and two triple tubes. There's a large chunk of the fleet that's three 4-inch and two triple tubes, and it'll make about 32 knots all. They have some with three 5-inch, three 4-inch. They're more modern designs. They have four 5-inch guns, two quadruple tubes. They do have a few with eight 4-inch guns, two quadruple tubes, 36 knots, and these are actually pretty good, but they do only have a few of them. Then they went back to three 5-inch guns briefly. They're three most recent destroyers of the Budfu class. Eight 5-inch guns, two quadruple tubes, 36 knots. These are the first destroyers I've seen that have actually stacked up somewhat comparably to modern American destroyers. I think the latest no, they are. They are similar to the modern American destroyers, in fairness. After France, we're going to look at Austria-Hungary. 65 destroyers, amounting to about 100,000 tons. They also have a few older ships with just two 5-inch guns and three triple torpedo tubes. Also some with two 4-inch and two triple torpedo tubes, which I assume they're heavier just because of weight, I guess, but not great. Then they have the bulk of their fleet is these three 4-inch or three 5-inch gun armed ships with two triple torpedo tubes, or in a few cases two quadruple. But they also have fair number of ships with eight 4-inch guns and two quadruple torpedo tubes. Albeit they then went back to four 5-inch guns, six 4-inch, three 5-inch. They have five recently built ships with eight 5-inch guns and two quadruple tubes, which are about equivalent to American designs. Then that brings us to Japan. Japan has 87 destroyers, which is the third largest force in the world by numbers, although fourth largest by tonnage at about 126,000 tons. They have a few old 800 tonners with two 4-inch guns and two twin tubes still in service, along with a couple with two quadruple tubes, fair number with two 5-inch guns and two or three triple tubes. Then they've got, as usual for the AI, this huge assembly of ships with three, 4, or 5-inch guns and two quadruple or three triple tubes, all of them making about 32, 33 knots. At some point, they put four 5-inch guns on instead with two quadruple tubes, and that's pretty much still what they're running with. Except they've just built a couple of ships with three 4-inch guns, two quadruple tubes, make 33 knots. These are hopeless for being built in 1939. They're only 1,100 tons. They're basically just torpedo boats. Germany has the second largest destroyer fleet in the world by both numbers and tonnage, with 128 destroyers, amounting to 176,000 tons. The oldest of these have two 5-inch guns and two twin tubes. They have a very large assembly of ships with something on the order of three 4-inch guns or three 5-inch guns and two triple or two quadruple tubes. Just piles of them. That's the. I hesitate to even say it is the bulk of the fleet because they really do have a lot of destroyers, to be fair. They built a few with six 4-inch guns, then went back to four 5-inch guns. They put out the Jaguar class with eight 4-inch guns, two quadruple tubes, 34 knots. These are quite nice, actually, to be fair, especially as they're 15 years or so old, almost. Then they did a three 6-inch, four 5-inch gun-armed class, which 35 knots, two quadruple tubes. These are quite nice, except it looks like the 5-inch guns, well, as they would be as secondaries, are mounted on the sides, so the broadside is three 6-inch, two 5-inch guns, which is probably not as good as eight 5-inch guns. Six 4-inch. They have four 4-inch guns and three quad tubes, or possibly four triple tubes on the C-23 class. They tried 3 6-inch, 4 4-inch. Their latest design appears to be back to the 4 4-inch and no less than 12 torpedo tubes. 37 knots, too. This is a very dangerous torpedo boat, not so much a destroyer. But that's a fair design tack to take. Now, the U.S. has only 70 destroyers, which is still the fourth most in the world, to be fair. They amount to 139,000 tons, which is third most in the world. They definitely average heavier than others, as we don't really have any hopelessly obsolete designs in service anymore. In fact, the entire fleet, all 70, consist entirely of the Winslow and Perry classes. Probably, I'm not going to do an exact count. I would guess about 50 of them are the Winslow class, which built between 1925 and 1930. These are 1,900 tons, 8 5-inch guns, 2 quadruple torpedo tubes. They make 34 knots. And most of them a lot of them have seen combat service by now. And then more recently, we've built about 20 of the Perry class, which are built 1935-36, fundamentally fairly similar, 2,200 tons, 8 5-inch guns, which are all dual purpose, 2 quadruple torpedo tubes, and they make 36 knots. And these are pretty much the expected sort of World War II era destroyer for the U.S. I don't see what we're going to improve on this in the immediate future anyway. And I would say this is pretty much the best destroyer that I've seen anywhere around the world, or at least a match for them, and in much greater numbers. That said, the largest destroyer force in the world, by both numbers and tonnage, is Britain, with 129 destroyers amounting to 203,000 tons. They do still have a large number of old destroyers armed with 3 or 4 4-inch guns. Some of these only have 2 twin tubes or 2 triples. They made it to 2 quadruples eventually. But looks like that is very much the bulk of their fleet, is the 3-gun armed ships. However, about 1927, to be fair, not long after we did, they did swap over to building with 8 5-inch guns and 2 quadruple tubes, and these are very respectable destroyers. However, as the AI tends to do, they weren't able to stick with it, and they shortly went back to a smaller design with 4 5-inch guns, or 8 4-inch guns, or 4 5-inch guns again for a good run. And the very latest class, after a few more 8 5-inch gun armed ships, is back to 4 5-inch guns. I don't know why. I mean, cost saving, I assume, but Britain has a pretty huge budget. To be fair, it's actually significantly less than the U.S. budget at this point. But yeah, I mean, although they have more tonnage, the U.S. fleet has a lot of gun power in its destroyers compared to the British fleet. The British are probably close in torpedoes, but definitely inferior in gunnery. So with that, we're going to move over to light cruisers. Now, Russia actually has a fairly respectable light cruiser force with 7 ships amounting to 138, almost 139,000 tons. Although I think they don't actually amount to that. That's the whole 19 with what they're building in 12 new light cruisers due to their losses in the last war, and they're replacing their whole fleet right now. What they've actually got probably amounts to what, 50,000 tons maybe? Yeah, something like that. They have 1 surviving Nadezhda, Veliki Knyaz Konstantin, with 7 6-inch guns, 30 knots, 4 3-inch guns, 2-inch belt. This cruiser is just mildly outdated. It's not actually, well, the main problem is its guns aren't centerline, which means it's fairly substantially outdated, really. Then they have 1 Flora with 8 5-inch guns, basically no armor, 31 knots. This only has 5-inch guns. It's, well, as you can see, the entire American destroyer fleet has as much firepower as this light cruiser. More if you count that the American destroyers have more torpedoes as well. And pretty much as much armor. So I don't really know what the purpose of this ship is. Destroyer leader, maybe, but it's too slow, so no. They have Chervona Ukraina and Admiral Flota Lobov of the Slava class, which have 6 6-inch guns and what appears to be 3 twin turrets, plus 8 3-inch guns, 31 knots, 2.5-inch belt. These, I assume, are Russia's best foot forward on a modern cruiser, at least for that time. They're not. The main thing wrong with them is that they're missing a turret, which they probably didn't have the tech for or something. But they're not an abysmal design. Most recently, they've begun building the Krasny Krim class post-war to make up losses. So far, they've finished 3 of them, and these are 9,400-ton cruisers, armed with 15 5-inch guns and what appears to be 5 triple turrets. They make 33 knots, have a 3-inch belt, carry 2 aircraft, and they've got 2 triple above-water torpedo tubes. Boy, they're so close. If they just upped their main armament to 6-inch guns, this would be a terrifying cruiser. As it is, it's nigh on useless. I'm fairly confident that a light cruiser armed with 8 or 9 6-inch guns will still beat this ship. Which means it's just weird. And it's definitely a waste of potential, even if it could technically beat a ship with 8 or 9 6-inch guns. That said, they're building 3 more of those. And it appears they also have a class of 5, the Tbilisi class at 5,300 tons, and 4 Orpheus at 8,400 tons building. The nice thing for the AI about getting their whole fleet destroyed is that they can. It's about the only way to make them ditch legacy designs and actually build a modern new fleet. Which Russia is very much doing. Although all of the AI are building light cruisers at a pretty mad rate, probably to match my own construction of light cruisers, because the AI very much does that. You'll always notice whatever you build within a year or two, the AI will start building something to match it, if they can. Right, so after Russia, Spain. Spain cannot match it. Spain has 3 light cruisers amounting to about 20,000 tons. These being the 2 Conde del Veneditos, were the backbone of their fleet, with 6 6-inch guns, 29 knots, 2.5-inch belt. These were fine in 1920. Spain didn't manage to. Oh, they did build them in 1921. These were fine in 1921. They're not okay now. They're quite dated. And it appears their new design, the Gravina, is pretty much similar to the Russian design. 10,000 tons, 32 knots, 3-inch belt, 2 aircraft, 15 5-inch guns and 5 triple turrets, 12 4-inch guns, all dual purpose, 2 triple torpedo tubes. Look, it is an absolute waste to have a 10,000-ton cruiser with no gun bigger than 5 inches. This is like, it's an exponential sort of scale in terms of explosive power of shells. 6-inch gun, 8 or 9 6-inch guns is almost certainly worth 15 5-inch guns in a broadside. I'm fairly sure it is. Such a waste to have this many 5-inch guns, yeah. Apparently that's the only way they reckon they can match us, though. They would be wrong. Italy has 7 light cruisers and is currently scheduled to more than double that fleet with 9 more. Oh, Spain is building, what, 6 more Gravinas, by the way? Yeah, good luck with that. Italy has 7 light cruisers and is building 9 more at present. 3 of them are the old Irid class with 6 6-inch guns, 29 knots, 2 twin torpedo tubes. Again, these are the type that were good in 1918, are not good now. The 2 Minervas with 5 5-inch guns were hideously undergunned even when they were built, and more so now. There are actually many, many destroyers in the world that are both faster and significantly outgun these light cruisers at this point. So I have no idea what role they even would fill. Then they have Coatit, which, this, to be fair, built in 1927, has 8 6-inch, 8 4-inch guns, 32 knots, 2-inch belt. This, and 2 quad, no, it looks like actually 4 twin torpedo tubes above water, which is fine too. Same difference, really. This is quite a nice modern light cruiser, actually. This is a very good design Italy has. Nothing at all wrong with it. The problem is they built exactly one, and then for some reason reverted to Tripoli with 5-inch guns. Even if it's slightly faster. No, it's not even faster, is it? Yeah, call it cost saving, but Tripoli is literally slower and has less guns. Now they are building currently some 7 Quarto class of 9,600 tons and 2 Libyas of 7,500 tons. We can only hope for Italy's sake that the Quartos actually have 6-inch guns and not 5-inch guns. Now, France has 9 light cruisers actually in service and is building 7. Their light cruisers are 2 Elys, which survived the war with us, armed with 6 6-inch guns, 5,400 tons, 29 knots, 2 twin torpedo tubes. These proved to be fairly solid in the war with us against, say, the American Juno class, although they were outgunned by the American Juno class, actually, but they were good against the predecessors to that, which means they're now definitely a little bit outdated, but they were a good design in 1918. However, the Minervas... Oh, wait, I'm back to Italy somehow. Right. The Bagoods are the immediate follow-up and are almost identical. They're actually a knot slower, I'm noticing. But they have more AA shoved on. I don't know what the alleged upgrade is. That half an inch less of belt armor too? Yeah. Okay, I don't know what the alleged upgrade of the Bagood class is, especially as it's 200 tons more. But it's the sort of design that was all right in the early 20s and very much not anymore. Unfortunately, the same definitely applies to the Davout class here, which, okay, it has its guns in twin turrets instead of singles, but that just kind of begs the question, why not just have 4 twin turrets so you actually can match the firepower? Okay, it has a better broadside than the older classes, 6 guns rather than 5, but you really should just find room to stick the extra turret in at that point. As it is, it's just a slightly inferior version of all the other modern cruisers. And unfortunately, like so much of the other AI, their new class, to respond to my spurt of building, the Lalande, is armed with 16 5-inch guns and what appears to be 8, although I only actually count 6. I don't know where the other 2 are hiding. Oh, wait. Oh, God. Looks like 6 center-line twin 5-inch turrets plus 2 wing turrets. France, why are you bringing back wing turrets in 1939? They're 7,300 tons, 32 knots, 2 triple torpedo tubes. Look, it also has no secondary armament. This is not good. Okay, yes, it has a broadside of 14 5-inch guns. I really don't reckon that beats 8 or 9 6-inch guns. And don't my latest ships have... Fact check myself. Yes, the latest American design, for the record, actually has 12 6-inch guns. Not 8 or 9. And that definitely beats 15 or 16 5-inch guns. Which just means... To be fair, this will be perfectly good against any of the other 5-inch AI designs out there. But it won't fare well against the latest American cruisers at all. And... the wing turrets are just dumb for 1939 design. So I'm not impressed, France. They're building one more of those. They also have 6 5,300-ton free ants building, which I have to assume won't be that good since they're literally less heavy than the 1918 designs. Austria has 8 light cruisers in service, isn't currently on a building spree of them, with only 1 under construction. In fact, they're only building 1 light cruiser, 2 destroyers right now, which seems wildly low. But they have 2 Navaras with 5 6-inch guns left over from 1917. They were all right then. Not brilliant, because 6 6-inch guns was more like the standard. They're bad now. They also have a Helgoland from that period, which was definitely better at that time. It's still marginally better. It's still not good. However, first glance, I'm much more impressed with what I'm seeing from their modern construction. The Artemisia class from the mid 30s has 9 6-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, makes 32 knots, 8 4-inch secondaries, 2 triple torpedo tubes, 3-inch belt. Attention, Italy, Russia, France, Spain. Austria-Hungary has just humiliated you all on how to build a light cruiser, because this is actually a good design. This is a dangerous light cruiser. In a gunnery duel, it would beat any of the new light cruisers we've seen so far. And that's without looking at the fact that they've just built 3 Jupiter class, 9,600 tons, 31 knots, 15 6-inch guns in 5 triple turrets, 12 4-inch guns secondary, 2 triple torpedo tubes, 31 knots, carries 2 aircraft. The 1-inch of belt armor is a little concerning, but to be fair, the 2-3 inches even, at most ranges, modern 6-inch guns do pretty much just punch through armor like that, so it's probably not a huge deal. And this ship is actually well armed and pretty fast. I'm a little concerned about the armor, but I'd much rather have this than what we've seen out of any of the other AI powers so far. They've managed to build 3 and are building a 4th, so that's a good sign from Austria-Hungary. Very good work. Now, Japan. Japan has 12 light cruisers, which is actually the 3rd most in the world. They're building 12 more. Theoretically, Japan might have the biggest light cruiser force in the world pretty shortly. They're 2nd on theoretical tonnage right now, but I'm going to be scrapping 11 of mine pretty shortly, so as soon as the replacements are finished. They have, now, of course, the Japanese ones are, some of them, quite dated. They do have 4 Matsushimas from 1921 still in service with 5 6-inch guns, 29 knots. They're outdated now, definitively. But if they decommission them when they finish all these 10,000 tonners, then that's fine. They have Yoshino, which has 8 6-inch guns, 8 4-inch, 33 knots. This is pretty close to being a clone of like my Juno class, and as a result, it's excellent. It's a shame they only have 1 of them, but it's still good. They did take a wrong turn in the early 30s with the 2 Takasagos, which only have 8 5-inch guns in 4 twin turrets. Otherwise, all pretty standard, light armor, but that's just clearly inferior to anything with 6-inch guns. However, unlike most of the AI powers, they actually righted it by then building 3 Kasagis with 9 6-inch guns and 3 triple turrets, 8 4-inch, 2 triple torpedo tubes, 32 knots, 3-inch belt. A very nice design all around, similar to what Austria-Hungary built. And most recently, they're building the 10,000-ton Akashi class with 12 6-inch guns and 4 triple turrets, 16 4-inch guns, 2 triple torpedo tubes, 31 knots, 4-inch belt, 2 aircraft. This is a beefy heavy cruiser, actually. This one really might even beat one of mine in a one-on-one battle. Although it's a bit slower, I think. How fast is the American Cincinnati class? Yeah, it's 2 knots slower, but it's also just 600 tons heavier. This is a very beefy, heavy, light... See, I'm trying to call it a heavy cruiser now. It's not, because it doesn't have bigger guns. And 10,000 tons is a lot to only have 6-inch guns, but I'm pretty close to that myself, so I can't really complain. Very beefy light cruiser, very nice. And the fact that they're building 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them, plus another 4 10,000-ton light cruisers of the Tama class, is quite impressive. Plus they got 3 7,500-tonners, which should hopefully at least have 6-inch guns. After Japan, Germany. Germany has the largest force of light cruisers in actual service in the world, but they're not building as many new ones. They have 19, which is going to amount to probably 140,000 tons or something. They're building 4 more, which will take them up to 162,000 tons. Now, 5 of them are the old Berlin class from about 1920. 5 6-inch guns, 29 knots, 3-inch belt, 2 twin torpedo tubes. Pretty standard, all very well and good in 1920. Not so very well and good now, definitely dated. Also, the one-off Gazelle from the mid-20s, only 5-inch guns. Trash. I mean, like, the basic design would be absolutely fine if they literally just gave it 6-inch guns instead of 5-inch. I don't know why, for the life of me, the AI insists on putting 5-inch guns on so many light cruisers. Then, right after that, they built the Nymphs, which have 6 6-inch guns in 3 twin turrets. I'd probably rather have this than the 5-inch gun-armed ships. But when you have this, it just sort of begs the question of why you didn't just go with the standard internationally and put 4 twin turrets on, right? Like, would it have killed you that much? However, all is forgiven because in the early 30s they built 7 Danzig class cruisers with 9 6-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, 8 4-inch, 32 knots, 2-inch belt, 2 triple torpedo tubes. I have nothing at all bad to say about these. They're a very nice design. They obviously won't be a match for the very, very latest wave of cruisers out of the US, but they're not, like, far behind either. Just basically a turret short. Very nice class. Which makes it extra weird to see they've taken a sort of a step. Alright, I'm going to credit them with a step in a different direction with the Stralsund class. This is the first thing I've seen that I would classify as not just a slightly undergunned light cruiser, but an actual attempt at a torpedo cruiser, right? 7 6-inch guns in what appears to be, okay, to be fair, it looks like it's 5 single centerline turrets plus 2 wing, and that's a little bit unforgivable because it's just so terrible. They don't even have centerline torpedo tubes by the look of it, so just why? Why would you not just do... I can't even think that 7 individual single turrets can be lighter than 4 twin turrets would be, really. Not by much, certainly. So yeah, the layout of that is kind of unforgivable. However, 4 triple torpedo tubes obviously is the real core of this design. 33 knots, 3-inch belt. This thing is basically a very... It's a torpedo cruiser. It's faster than average for a cruiser. It's got a ton of torpedo tubes piled on. It's designed to torpedo things, and it might do that well. However, I still find the gun, even with that in mind, I still find the gun layout baffling, so definitely minus points for that. They're currently building 4 9,400-ton Aachems, which will be the biggest light cruisers they've built. Now, the U.S. has 12 light cruisers in service, which probably amount to about, 100,000 tons, and 11 more building because we are in the middle of a complete replacement of the light cruiser force. Currently in service are 11 Juno class, built in the mid-20s, 24 to 26. These are 7,800 tons, 30 knots, 8 6-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 8 4-inch guns, a couple of submerged torpedo tubes, but none deck, which I kind of regret now, but didn't turn out to be a huge deal for most of their fighting history. 3-inch belt, 1-inch deck. Overall, at the time these were built, they were excellent. There were not a lot of other 8 6-inch gun armed cruisers around. In all reality, they're still not that bad. They're a little slower than the modern designs. They're honestly still just as well armed as most of what the AI is putting out. I wouldn't be all that ashamed to bring the Junos into battle right now still. You'd want to up the AA some, but it's not a huge deal necessarily. The AA is probably the main thing you would want to change. However, kind of irrelevant because they are all, as we speak, being replaced within the next 7 months at the longest by the 12 ships of the Cincinnati class. Each Cincinnati, 9,400 tons, makes 32 knots, 4 triple 6-inch turrets, 8 4-inch secondaries, 2 triple above water torpedo tubes, down to a 2-inch belt, but up to a 2-inch deck, which at modern combat ranges probably makes her better armored overall. This, I saw maybe a couple of cruisers out there that could at least match her, depending on details. There are a few out there piled with 12 or 15 6-inch guns. They're very few and far between. I think only really Japan and Austria-Hungary had them. Japan has enough to be a concern, actually, but Japan is way behind in certain other things. Austria-Hungary is just no threat to the US and only has 4 of them. I suspect with 12, the US will have the most of super modern designs like this. Even if Japan gets close, it's sort of the least of Japan's concerns, really. So I'm very confident in the Cincinnati's for the future of the US light cruiser force based on what I've seen here. Although they may be outnumbered just because of the sheer enormous piles of what the AI is building right now, but if the AI isn't building with 6-inch guns, then it doesn't really matter, and a lot of them aren't. Now, Britain, weirdly, for considering Britain's historical priorities, sort of, but, well, they've gone hard. Britain have gone hard into heavy cruisers and definitely neglected their light cruisers. They only have 11, amounting to 105,000 tons. They've got 1 more building, so they're not really responding to the building craze that everybody else is engaged in. Now, ultimately, that'll leave them with 12, which is the same number the US is planned to have, but I can't see those 12 exactly being equivalent. Although, in fairness, I didn't know this actually, so I take back part of what I just said. They reacted faster than everyone else, or even before the US did, and they do have a pretty nice force here. Now, okay, they have Amphion from 1921 with 7 6-inch guns in individual turrets, and only 3 of them are centerline, and she makes 29 knots, and this thing is, what, a 5-gun broadside? Yeah, it's not good. They have the 3 Champions from mid-20s, which have 5 centerline guns, but still 2 wing guns, 30 knots. I mean, these are a little less outdated, but they still only have a 6-gun broadside, and they're still a little slow. They're not great. However, in fairness to Britain, in the last couple of years, they have managed to pour out 7 of the Conquest and Canada classes, which let me take a better look at, but these look like thoroughly modern new light cruisers. The Conquest class have what appears to be 5 triple 6-inch turrets, 12 4-inch guns, 2 triple torpedo tubes, 3-inch belt, 31 knots, and 2 scouting aircraft. Overall, honestly, theoretically, these do beat a Cincinnati in a head-to-head fight. They will have slightly less of them, ultimately. 7 finished and an 8th building to my 12. And 12 versus 8 would win if it somehow came to a weird all-light cruiser fight. But the Conquests and Canadas are definitely an excellent light cruiser design. Personally, I don't know if the aircraft are really necessary, but they could be they can certainly be handy if a light cruiser gets out on its own. Also, they're just slightly slower, but they've got extra armament, and that could count for a lot in a head-to-head fight. That extra turret. The Canadas now, so far as I can see, the Canadas are identical to the Conquests. I don't see literally any difference whatsoever. There's probably something under the hood, but I can't tell you what it is. But between them, the 7, almost 8 Conquests and Canadas, excellent light cruiser force for Britain, actually. Best in the world that's not the US. I still think the US is better by numbers, if nothing else, but Britain have built some very nice light cruisers there, which is impressive considering how good their heavy cruiser force is. Now we move into the field of heavy cruisers. Russia has 8 in service and is building 4 more. Probably the 8 in service are about 110, 120,000 tons. That's the core. Honestly, that is the largest portion of their surviving navy. It was already one of probably the most critical portion of their navy before the war, actually. But I believe everything they've got here is built. Maybe not everything. Like this one might not be post-war, but yeah, no, because it was raiding during the war, so it wasn't post-war. But this is the only one from before the war. Everything else has been built since. So they have 3 Nikolaev class, 12,900 tons, 30 knots, 6 10-inch guns in 3 twin turrets, 14 6-inch guns in... I don't know what, actually. I see 6 twin turrets. Not sure where the other 2 guns are. For game purposes, it's considered to be 7 to a side for secondaries, I believe. And then 8 4-inch guns, tertiary. 4-inch belt, 30 knots. Well, this ship is enormous and it has a hell of a lot of firepower. But it's also sort of enormously vulnerable to modern battle cruisers. It's kind of playing at being a battle cruiser, but it's not even close to as good as one. That said, I shouldn't write it off entirely, because in a head-to-head with American heavy cruisers, it would almost certainly win. And those 10-inch guns hit hard, even if it only has 6 of them instead of 8. And it's got a very heavy secondary armament. So I'm not going to call it a bad design. I just think it's a little, I don't know, it's not the niche that I designed for, let's put it that way. What is it, the latest in the US? Yeah, see, also, when you get to the point that the latest US designs have with 12 9-inch guns, that probably can beat this. Because the 6-inch guns are very significantly less than 9-inch, and they only have half as many 10-inch. I don't know, it would be an interesting direct slugging match, to be honest, but I think that most likely the latest American designs beat these. However, they apparently recognized that because they then built Maxim Gorky with 12 10-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, plus 16 5-inch, 30 knots, 3-inch belt. This thing doesn't do anything but, like, it's got no torpedoes, but it doesn't need them. I mean, it's kind of pointless to have them, really, on a heavy cruiser design. At this point, this thing has an enormous amount of gun power. I haven't yet seen... I mean, there's no real-world heavy cruiser that would have beaten this. Probably not even the German pocket battleships. I think those had 11-inch guns, but this has more. I think this would have beaten them. Although the armor is terrible, really, for the size that it is, so... That's true. That's the weak point of this. It does not have very impressive armor. Not on the belt. We can only assume not on the deck either. But it's a hell of a lot of gun power for a heavy cruiser. Still not enough to give a modern battlecruiser any concern, but a lot. And they followed that with the 3 Molotov class, which are a knot faster and a bit heavier armored, it looks like, with the same armament, and somehow 700 tons lighter. I don't know how they pulled that off in the same year, what else they might have compromised or whatever, but those 4 are very nasty heavy cruisers. Now, fascinatingly, they followed that with Azov, which is 300 tons heavier, and a year later, and only mounts 9 8-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, plus 16 3-inch, 4-inch belt, 2 aircraft. Okay, that does really beg the question of what they sacrificed to get that many guns on a Molotov of this tonnage. Like, I do wonder if this has, like, something stupid like short range or low freeboard or just literally no deck armor or something. If only because how severe the contrast is with an Azov at the same tonnage, which is just way less heavily armed. But hard to say without a war happening. For now, we have to assume that the Molotovs are not a paper tiger, and if they aren't, then that's a hell of a lot of firepower. After them, Spain. Spain actually has 8 heavy cruisers amounting to almost 150,000 tons. They start with, now to be fair, Spain is absolutely 100% using heavy cruisers in place of battle cruisers. They have 0 battle cruisers in surface, right? And the same is almost true of Russia, but that wasn't Russia's intent. They just lost all of them in the war. And now they're kind of using them as replacements, yeah. But anyway, Spain has 4 Reina Regente class heavy cruisers from the late 20s, which are 20,000 tons, 12 10-inch guns, 14 5-inch, 6 4-inch, 5.5-inch belt. They make 31 knots. They carry 2 aircraft. Look, against pretty much any heavy cruiser, these win. Although they're not actually better armed than the new Russian Molotovs, but they are better armored. So I still think they probably win, depending on the state of gun tech and similar things. Against the Molotovs. But look, the Molotovs and my American latest ships and stuff are on the sort of brink for a heavy cruiser. This thing really should just be classed as a battle cruiser. 20,000 tons, I think, is the limit. I'm calling it, where this is just Spain's equivalent of a battle cruiser. It will have cost, well, a lot less than a modern 40,000 ton battle cruiser still, but problem is they have no battle cruisers proper to fill that role. So this is inevitably sort of trying to do the sort of things that a battle cruiser would do in another navy, and it is going to die doing that because real battle cruisers will still absolutely easily take it to pieces. Unfortunately, Isabel II is under rebuild, so we can't see her in detail, but she's 13,500 tons, 8 8-inch guns, 12 4-inch, looks like 6 torpedo tubes. I would hazard a guess that her actual speed is 32 knots. She's going to be pretty similar to the Principe Alfonsos, but with one less turret and different secondaries, and the torpedoes thrown on. Most recently, Spain has built the 3 Principe Alfonso class with 10 8-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 16 3-inch, 32 knots, 4.5-inch belt. 10 and 4, no. 2 triple, 2 twin turrets, yeah. These are sort of much more typical, lighter, heavy cruisers. I mean, they're still pretty well armed, pretty well armored, fast enough. Very unexceptional though. In 1940, these are basically, in this universe in 1940, these are basically just all around below average without being, hideously flawed in any way. But there's just so many 9 and 10-inch gunned heavy cruisers floating around in this universe that 8 inches is just sort of inadequate almost, or just definitively below average. After them, we have Italy. Italy have 8 heavy cruisers amounting to 118,000 tons, with 1 under construction. 3 of them are the Amalfis from the early 30s. These have 8 8-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 4 3-inch, 4.5-inch belt, 31 knots. Much like what I just said of the Spanish cruisers, except they were built earlier, and Italy actually does have battle cruisers, so these are just filling a very traditional heavy cruiser role, you would assume. And they should be good enough at that. The 6-inch heavy battery is maybe a little much for only having 8 8-inch guns as the primaries. But, yeah, no, that is my main criticism. If you're going to have a 14 6-inch gun secondary battery, Maybe just up your primary battery to 9 or 10 inches or something. But again, they're not fatally flawed. Now they followed that with four San Marco class, which are 13,700 tons, make 32 knots, 8 8-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 12 4-inch dual-purpose guns, 2 triple torpedo tubes, 4-inch belt, 2 scouting aircraft. These have the same issues as the last one, but well, you'll notice they actually have all-around less armament, ultimately, when you come down to it, although they do have the torpedo tubes shoved on. Now they have more speed. I'm not actually sure where all that weight went into, because they have a bit less armor, less armament, just more speed. The aircraft partially, although... Yeah, the aircraft partially. Those are somewhat heavy for cruisers to take on. They're not weight cheap. Again, nothing really wrong with this cruiser design. It's just there are a lot of 9 and 10-inch heavy cruiser designs around even the same tonnage that are pretty much definitely going to beat it in a fight. And then their latest is San Giusto, which appears to be pretty much identical, but 200 tons heavier. Or lighter, that is, lighter. So it's probably just technological advance there, saving them a bit of displacement and money. Nothing wrong with that, but nothing exceptional either. Right then, France has 11 heavy cruisers in surface, amounting to 168,000 tons, with 2 more under construction. France, however, is, and this is important to note, France is another country that has 0 battle cruisers. Now, that's pretty much because they almost all died in the war with me, and whatever survived was sold that they scrapped it. But they have 0 battle cruisers. And you do have to consider that when judging. To be fair, at a glance, they haven't even built any real battle cruiser replacement type heavy cruisers. They just have nothing in the very large cruiser category at all, which is sort of a glaring weakness, because if battle cruisers ever get up against these heavy cruisers, they'll just shred them. Right. Just shred them easily. Amiral Scharner has 11,100 tons, 30 knots, 8 8-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 16 4-inch, 4.5-inch belt. Nothing wrong with that at all, especially for a 1928 design. Just that slight bit, There are heavier ships around, but it's not bad. They have 5 Bruys, which are 12,000 tons, 30 knots, 8 8-inch guns, 14 6-inch guns, 4 3-inch, 5.5-inch belt. Well armored, reasonably armed. Again, with just having that many 6-inch guns, you just wonder if it would be worth pushing the caliber of the main guns up a little bit at some point. But there's nothing wrong with it, and it is very well armored. Just maybe a little undergunned. And then 5 Kleber class, their most recent effort. 13,600 tons, 8 8-inch, 12 4-inch, 4 twin turrets for the 8-inch, 5-inch belt, 32 knots, 2 aircraft, 2 triple torpedo tubes. It's the same armament as the last couple of generations, except less secondaries, quite a lot less secondaries than the Bruys, and less armor slightly, at least on the belt. Maybe it has a lot more deck or something, though, yeah. And it adds aircraft, and it manages to weigh 1,600 tons, and torpedoes, and it manages to weigh 1,600 tons more, so there's something going on under the hood to improve that from Bruy, at least hopefully. I would assume it's more armor somewhere that isn't the belt. Maybe other things too, like range. Either way, this isn't a terrible light heavy cruiser design, but it's definitely unexceptional. And I'm very confident that the American light cruisers, heavy cruisers, would beat it pretty comfortably. They are building just now 2 Sully class, which are almost 15,000 tons. Maybe those will finally go up from 8-inch guns. I don't know. Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary has the world's largest All right, I did not realize this, did not see this coming. Austria-Hungary has the world's largest heavy cruiser force by tonnage. Although that's not 100% true because two of those are still building and they're not done yet, but they will shortly, presumably. I mean, Britain's not building any right now, so they'll exceed Britain by that 5,000 tons within a year or something whenever these two are done. That's wild. Although, okay, 17 puts them joint second by numbers. 19 will put them clear second. They are, however, again, another nation that has 0 battle cruisers, which very much you have to take in mind. 4 of the powers have 0 battle cruisers now, which is... Everybody has a lot less than they did. They're definitely a dying breed, a little faster than the battleships are. Which I understand, but I still think, like, battle cruisers will still absolutely shred all of these heavy cruisers that people are building, so I, for one, think that in this era, with huge naval budgets, they're still worth having. Anyway, Austria has 5 Kaiser Karl VI from the mid-1920s. These have 9 10-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, 14 5-inch, 6 4-inch. They make 29 knots, 4.5-inch belt, 2 aircraft, 15,600 tons is kind of the rub with these. They are very heavy for heavy cruisers. Their armor is unexceptional. Their speed is a bit slow for the modern era. 9 10-inch guns, though, is not to be trifled with by anything that's not a capital ship. So you can't exactly write them off, and there's nothing too horrible about their speed or armor. Overall, and 2 triple torpedo tubes too. Overall, quite a dangerous sort of ship. Just quite expensive for the Austrian budget, and they're definitely sort of trying to substitute their lack of battle cruisers with that. But they got 5 of them, so that's not nothing. They followed that with 6 of the Marburg class, which 8 9-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 12 5-inch, 8 4-inch, 2 triple torpedo tubes. They make 29 knots and a 4.5-inch belt. These are a bit more sort of 8 9-inch guns, I would say, is roughly the average heavy cruiser armament in this universe, maybe. It's definitely 8 8-inch guns is a bit below the average, I'm fairly sure, at this point in this world. Even though historically that was what pretty much everybody had. But that was because of a naval treaty, which does not exist in this world. Anyway, it's a bit slow, it's a bit under-armored, not terribly so. The gunnery is fine, very respectable, definitely enough to give anything pause that's in its weight class, and it's a bit cheaper than the last class, so I would say fairly solid. Been oddly impressed by everything Austria's built. Most recently, they have 4 Budweis class built in the last few years, which 12 10-inch guns, 16 5-inch, 32 knots, 4-inch belt, coming in at only 14,400 tons for 12 10-inch guns. Not too shabby. It's fast. It's not terribly well armored, but it's not terribly armored. If you see what I'm saying. And it's got an exceptional amount of firepower. I'm fairly sure it's basically similar to the Russian Molotovs, except it's actually faster by a knot. And it weighs 200 tons more. These might be the single most dangerous heavy cruisers in the world out of what I've seen so far. These are very, very nice. Assuming they don't have some other hideous flaw, but they seem very, very nice to me. Maybe they have 0 torpedo protection or something, because I am just trying to think... Honestly, I'm trying to think why my Charlottes with 12 9-inch guns are heavier than all these 12 10-inch gun designs. And I am guessing that it's partially because the AI has sacrificed on armor or torpedo protection or something somewhere, but it's hard to be sure. And to be fair, what the Austrians can definitely get away with is having all their ships be short-ranged or some such. And that's just not a problem for them, because they only have bases in the Adriatic anyway. Sorry, so that brings us to Japan. Japan has 17 heavy cruisers amounting to 238,000 tons, one more building, which makes them joint second in numbers, third in tonnage in the world. They are, however, another power with Austria and France and Spain who have no battle cruisers anymore. They didn't even lose all theirs in a war. They just decommissioned them all. And they have, like a lot of them with no battle cruisers, they have a lot of 10-inch gun-armed heavy cruisers. The Iwates from the 1920s, these have 10 10-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, but only 3 centerline, 2 wing, 10 6-inch, 6 4-inch, 28 knots, 6-inch belt. Like, these are well armed. They're not they're rather slow, but they're not absolutely hopeless. The obvious problem is the gun layout. It's still that factually they have a lot of firepower with effectively an 8 10-inch gun broadside. So it's still not a design that you can just ignore. And I understand why Japan keeps it around. But there are ships 2,200 tons lighter with more gunnery capabilities and faster in the modern era. So it's just a design that's really, really showing its age. And even in the 1920s, having wing turrets was weird, to be sure. They followed that with 3 Yakumo class, which have 8 8-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 30 knots, 4.5-inch belt, 16 4-inch. I mean, this is a much more bog standard, typical heavy cruiser design. Then packed it into a pretty low amount of tonnage, so I would say it's pretty well executed overall. Then the Kakos, 3 of them, from the late 20s, 15,000 tons, 9 10-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, 14 5-inch, 6 4-inch, 2 triple torpedo tubes, 5-inch belt, couple of spotter aircraft, 27 knots. This is, if you're going to execute a 10-inch armed heavy cruiser, this is pretty solid. I mean, the 3 triple turrets. Well, no, actually, no. It's slow. It's too slow. I don't know. I didn't catch that for whatever reason. Didn't really register it. It's too slow. The gun layout is fine. The armor is fine, etc. It's weird to have like mixed secondary tertiaries that are that close in caliber, and they're both dual purpose. So just why not have 16 or 18 5-inch guns and drop the 4-inch guns? But the main problem with this class is it is 3 knots slower than the average, 5 knots slower than what good modern ships are doing. Which means it's going to have trouble, really, realistically, using those 10-inch guns, and even generation-old battle cruisers are going to catch it and destroy it. Then right at the turn of the decade, in the early 30s, they built 2 Takao class, which 8 8-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 10,200 tons, 30 knots, 4-inch belt, 16 4-inch. Another very standard heavy cruiser design. Again, done on a relatively good amount of weight, so I would say well executed again. They didn't stick with that, though, as most recently they've built 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Haguro class, armed with 10 8-inch guns in 2 twin, 2 triple turrets, 16 3-inch dual purpose, 32 knots, 4.5-inch belt. These are basically a minor upgrade on the standard 8 8-inch thing, and I appreciate that. They're very fast. Their armor is good. The main problem I actually have is that the 3-inch dual-purpose guns are a bit light as a secondary armament, really. Most heavy cruisers have 4 or 5-inch. It's probably not a fatal flaw, but 3-inch guns will do increasingly little against, all the destroyers of today are armed with 5-inch guns. They're mostly 2,000 plus tons if they're being built new now, so you gotta be, pop guns won't necessarily see them off anymore. 3-inch shell will still do just fine against an aircraft, of course, but pretty much any caliber will, as long as it's measured in inches. And it has an actual explosive charge. Um, so it's not a bad design. Just I'm a little light on the secondaries. And then their most recent does seem to fix that. Suzuya, of which they have one and are building another. 12 8-inch guns in 4 triple turrets. 16 5-inch guns, dual purpose. 4.5-inch belt, 2-spotter aircraft, 31 knots. It's 600 tons heavier, and they've sacrificed a knot. And they've managed to fit on 2 more primary barrels and a much heavier dual purpose armament. I definitely like this design better. I think this is quite a nice modern heavy cruiser. Obviously, there are a lot of 9 and 10-inch gun ships out there, which will still defeat it, but it's relatively light compared to the flagships of most people around. Now, of course, ultimately, what you're going to come down to is that they don't really have. I mean, these are what they're trying to be battlecruiser replacements, but battlecruisers, of course, will still make mincemeat of all that. And this is a world where battlecruisers exist still, so gotta keep that in mind. Germany has 15 heavy cruisers, building 3 more. The 15 probably amount to about 200,000 tons, which pretty much securely puts them 4th in both numbers and tonnage. They have 4 Venetas from the 20s, which have 8 9-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 16 4-inch, 29 knots, and a 3.5-inch belt. They're a little lightly armored, which is odd for Germany, really. But their armament is quite solid. Their speed was good at the time and still isn't terrible. So overall, and the tonnage is quite respectable, as in low in a good way, probably. So I would say quite a nice design, the Venetas. Maybe not up to the very, very latest ships, and the armor's a little light, but not bad at all. Now, they've followed this with... They do have battlecruisers, but only a very small number now. They followed this up with a succession of big 10-inch armed cruisers. First, the 4 Gneisenau's, 8 10-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 16 4-inch, 28 knots, 4-inch belt. Look, the 8 10-inch guns, obviously, a lot of firepower. The armor, not great, not terrible. The speed, definitely below average. But there's nothing too insulting I can say about this. It's definitely got a lot of firepower. It's pretty scary. Obviously, it's not as big and scary as a Molotov type thing, but they got this done on 10,900 tons, which is pretty critical too. That's not really very much tonnage at all for having 10-inch guns. And now they followed that with the 4 Stuttgart class just a year or two later. 15,100 tons, these. 9 10-inch guns and 3 triple turrets, 14 5-inch and 12 4-inch dual-purpose guns, 2 triple torpedo tubes, 5-inch belt, couple of spotter aircraft, makes 30 knots. I mean, it's got a lot of firepower. The mixed secondaries to that extent slightly confuses me, but I mean, it's a lot of gun barrels for destroyer or aircraft work. It's well armored. It's well armed. It's fairly fast. Obviously, the only concern is that, of course, it must be very expensive at 15,100 tons. But I would say it's a very nice heavy cruiser, so I'm pretty impressed. They followed that with 2 Rostocks, which, unfortunately for me, look like a pretty clear step back. Yes, they still have 9 10-inch guns and 3 triple turrets, but only 30... Well, actually, they get another knot at 31. But for that, they sacrifice that heavy 5 and 4-inch mixed secondary armament for just 16 3-inch dual-purpose guns. So they've gained a knot, and they've gained a half-inch of belt armor. But they've lost a lot of that nice secondary armament. And I'm not really sure if that's worth it in a modern, this is a more aircraft-heavy environment. Destroyers are durable enough to maybe survive quite a few 3-inch hits. I'm not convinced by that change. But it's not that the new design is terrible, but I'm not convinced, really. It is 1,100 tons lighter, which counts for a lot. And then apparently they've given up on the 10-inch thing because their latest design, of which one is finished and three more are building, is the Regensburg. 8 8-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 12 4-inch guns, 2 triple torpedo tubes, 4-inch belt, 2 aircraft, makes 32 knots. Actually, I question this more than the other designs because 8 8-inch guns, for the fact that it's only 800 tons lighter than the Rostocks, to go down from 9 10-inch to 8 8-inch guns, yes, it is a bit heavier secondaries, and it's another knot faster, but it's also got even less armor, or like significantly less armor. So I'm not convinced by this change at all. I think this is a much worse optimized design than the Rostocks and Stuttgarts, probably. However, overall, Germany's heavy cruiser force quite dangerous. Quite dangerous. Now, the US, you'll have been noticing, definitely behind the curve in heavy cruisers at the moment. Only has 6 in service with 2 more building, amounting to, I don't know, 100, probably really only about 90,000 tons actually in service. Literally, the US has the world's smallest heavy cruiser force. Now, what we have, I think, is quite respectable. The Brooklyn class, which is 20 years old, but still holds up reasonably well with 8 9-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 25-inch secondaries. Not dual purpose, so that's definitely behind. 6-inch belt, 2-inch deck makes 28 knots. Look, definitely slower than it should be in the modern era. Still well armored. And then the main arm, honestly, the armament overall still good, except needs to be modernized with dual purpose. Overall, I do have to hold my hands up and say it's not that the ships themselves are that bad at the basic level, but at 20 years old, they most definitely need replacing. There's still a lot of ships out there that they would beat, but there's a lot they wouldn't either. There is also Rochester, which is 15,900 tons. To be fair, Rochester basically fixes the basic problems the Brooklyns had. 8 9-inch guns, 25-inch, 15,900 tons, 30 knots. For 1,000 tons heavier, and dropping an inch of belt armor, manages to get an extra half-inch of deck and an extra 2 knots of speed. And that makes this a much more viable design still in the modern era, albeit it's really rather heavy for what it gets, but I think that's because I have better armor than most of the AI still. I'm much less disappointed with the Rochester, although it could definitely still use dual purpose refit. Fortunately, all of these ships are expected to be replaced within about 3 years or so, let's say, by the Charlotte class. And the Charlotte class, I have full confidence in. 12 9-inch guns with 4 triple turrets, 16 5-inch dual-purpose guns, makes 32 knots, 5-inch belt, 2.5-inch deck, couple of spotter aircraft. No torpedoes. I put torpedoes on the light cruisers of the latest generation. I'm not convinced heavy cruisers need them, to be honest. I think if a heavy cruiser gets into torpedo range, effective torpedo range, it's probably not doing its job right. I mean, this is a 16,000 ton ship still. Now, this is one of the heaviest and most expensive classes out there for sure at 16,000 tons, but 12 9-inch guns. Yes, there are some ships with 10-inch guns that outgun it in the absolute sense, but I would say it still is going to outgun about 75-80% of even the modern heavy cruiser designs out there. And it's better armored than most of them. And I believe it is faster than all of the 10-inch armed ships, which is critical. So the Charlottes, I do believe, can pretty much slug it out with all but maybe a half dozen or dozen out of the heavy cruisers that are out there. And it is faster than anything it can't run away from, or that it can't, fast enough to run away from anything it can't beat. So I've got full confidence in these. Now that said, I was really only planning to build 6 of them. I'm not sure if I'll stick to that. I mean, I've been aware that the A is building a lot. Maybe I hadn't fully internalized how many. We might build up to 10 Charlottes, possibly. Yeah. I still think, well, we have to keep in mind we haven't gotten to the battlecruiser forces. 4 out of those AI countries that have piles of armored cruisers have 0 battlecruisers. And I have bar none the best battlecruiser force in the world, no question. I would probably rather build more battlecruisers than more heavy cruisers if I do decide that my heavy, very large cruiser force needs reinforcement, honestly. We'll see, though. It's sort of a question of whether you can spread them around all your possessions and so on, too. Either way, we probably are going to need more very large cruisers beyond just the 6 Charlottes that I'm planning to build, but against anybody who's not Britain, I think it would be adequate, but we do have to think about Britain. Speaking of Britain, Britain has 22 heavy cruisers in service, amounting to 267,800 tons, which is the most by numbers, and the most actually in service by tonnage. Is shortly about to drop behind Austria-Hungary on tonnage, but effectively has the largest heavy cruiser force in the world. They have, from the mid-1920s, 3 Niobe class with 6 10-inch guns, 14 6-inch guns, 6 4-inch guns, 6-inch belt, makes 29 knots. Still very dangerous right up to the present. I do think that the Charlottes would beat them in a gun duel, but the Brooklyns pretty much certainly wouldn't. And I'm guessing they don't have that much deck armor, but I mean, the 10-inch guns will hit hard. Overall, still a solid design. The main problem now is it's a little slow, but not horrifically so. Also, I just don't fully understand the point of putting such a, surely take a couple of those 6-inch guns off and just get the 4th 10-inch turret. But you can't say it's terrible. They followed that with the 3 Amphitrite, which functionally are pretty much identical, but a knot faster, which does make a difference. And 100 tons heavier. A knot faster for 100 tons heavier isn't a bad trade-off at all. So that's a pretty nasty old 6 ships. Even if they are fairly old, they're still quite decent. Then 4 Creasy class, which 8 9-inch guns and 4 twin turrets. 16 4-inch dual purpose, 29 knots, 3-inch belt. Nothing wrong with these at all. Probably in roughly a similar place to my Brooklyn class in terms of they've been a little more modernized, though, with the dual-purpose guns and all. They're just a little bit faster, but they're also noticeably less armored. Overall, these are going to get beaten by the most modern heavy cruisers out there, but they're not worthless either, for sure. Not most recently, but geez, they have a lot of ships, which I knew, but it does sink in on the list there. 5 Leviathans they built in the early 30s. 6 10-inch guns, 14 6-inch, 8 4-inch, 5-inch belt, 28 knots. Now these I give less leeway to than I do the likes of the Amphitrites and Niobes, especially as they're actually slower. 28 knots is very slow for a cruiser that was built in the early 30s. And the 6 10-inch and 14 6-inch thing gets a little more glaring also in terms of just why not more 10-inch guns instead of all those secondaries. This isn't the semi-dreadnought era. That said, I mean, it will make them more dangerous against light cruisers if that's their prey. But it won't do any good against other heavy cruisers, really. Not if they stick to a decent engagement range, and certainly not against battle cruisers. 5-inch belt is good, though. I mean, it's just a bit slow, the armament's a bit wonky, but it's still very dangerous. Then they built 4 Bedfords, which are much more standard. 10,000 tons, 30 knots, 8 8-inch guns, 4-inch belt. This literally feels like a treaty cruiser. Like, it's exactly on the dot with 8 8-inch guns, 10,000 tons, 30 knots. Okay. There's, like, this is what's in the dictionary under average heavy cruiser, surely. Average World War II era heavy cruiser, that is. And it is. It's very much. I mean, actually, in this universe, in this world, it's below average because of how big and powerful most of the heavy cruisers have ended up getting. But there's still nothing really wrong with it. It'll easily beat pretty much all the light cruisers in the world. The very latest light cruisers with, like, 12 or 15 6-inch guns and faster should probably give it a run for its money in a gunfight, but it would most likely still beat them. There's a big difference between 8 and 6-inch guns still, ultimately. And then most recently, just in the last couple of years, we have the 3 Hampshire class. 9 10-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, 16 4-inch, 31 knots, 3.5-inch belt, couple of aircraft. Nice heavy armament, solid dual-purpose armament, definitely fast enough. A little under-armored, probably, although maybe they've reinforced the deck, which would be worth it. Yeah, nothing wrong with this design at all. I mean, Britain's heavy cruisers, by and large, all fairly solid. And I have to say the AI in general, their heavy cruiser designs are better than I expected. Not genius. I really question the utility of building 10-inch armed heavy cruisers myself in a world where battle cruisers still exist. But they'll certainly fare well if they do get into single ship actions with other heavy cruisers, so there's nothing objectively wrong with them. Right, from there, what do I move on to first? Let's look at the surface capital ships first. They're more of a dying breed than they deserve to be in 1940, really. Nobody has the slightest evidence in world yet that carriers can actually disable surface capital ships. Like, in fact, just in my war 5 years ago now, I guess, but several Russian carriers, full-size carriers, 60 aircraft each, had 4 mostly unescorted Japanese battleships under continuous bombing attack for several hours and didn't really achieve more than harassing and denting them. Certainly didn't get close to actually sinking any of them. It just wasn't there yet. And by 1940, it's probably getting there, objectively, to the point where carriers are more valuable than battleships, starting to at least, but there's no in-world evidence for why that transition should have happened. I wouldn't have built 8 carriers on the basis of just the evidence in the world. It's only because I know that they're going to be extremely valuable. What also baffles me is why everyone has moved away from battle cruisers towards heavy cruisers. That I actually don't understand at all, except obviously they can get more heavy cruisers than they can battle cruisers. But I mean, even those big 10-inch armed things, I would bet for any modern battlecruiser to probably kill 3 or 4 of those. Even in like a 3 or 4v1 situation. The difference between 10-inch guns and 16-inch guns is enormous. So I don't know why so many of the world's fleets have no battlecruisers. Don't understand that. There's not even really practically, when you're coming under air attack, there's not a big difference between a battlecruiser and a battleship in terms of armor, really. The battleship will have a bit thicker of an armored deck, but the odds of actually making a difference against a dive bomber or a torpedo bomber are not that high. If anything, you might bet on the battlecruiser's speed being more valuable in that sort of circumstance. But anyway, let's take a look at all that. Just goes to say, I disagree with how much the AI has drawn down its surface capital ships at this stage. I have not done so as much, especially with my battle cruisers, and I think that that's the right move for January of 1940. By 1945 or 50, we'll look at it a different way, but not for right this moment. So let's take a look at the battle cruisers. Russia, the world's smallest fleet, has one. In fairness, they pretty much lost what? What did they have coming into the war? 6 or 8 or something? Pretty sure this is the only one to have survived the war we fought with them. Chesma of the Rimnik class, 42,700 tons, 9 16-inch guns, 14 4-inch and 6 3-inch dual purpose, makes 30 knots, 12.5-inch belt. I mean, it's a very good, there's a very dangerous battlecruiser design with very respectable firepower, although this isn't quite a proper all-forward armament. It's a weird, we've stuck the bridge in between the forward guns armament. But the belt, I mean, the armor is excellent. The speed is excellent. The armament overall is good. The secondaries are a little wonky. But I would call it quite an impressive ship still. Albeit, they did lose hands down. I mean, this class did not fare well in the war with Russia, but that was basically bad luck. That the at least one of the ones they lost happened to just blunder into a line of dreadnoughts in the middle of the night at point blank range, which is just a very not winning scenario when you're the outnumbered battlecruiser force, no matter how good your battlecruiser is. I don't remember what happened to the other two. I think they were just lost in battle with my fleet, but like my fleet is just still better than this, even though this is a very nice battlecruiser. Overall, I would still call Chesma one of the more dangerous ships out in the waves right now. And probably it's just clearly better than Marat here, but we'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, that's the only battlecruiser the Russians have got, and they're not building a new one yet. Spain has none. To be fair, they've had none for a long while. They were the first country to, for whatever reason, decide to just build big heavy cruisers instead, and they went the furthest with building these 20,000-ton heavy cruisers, which I think is definitely weird, probably a mistake. Italy does still have 3 battle cruisers in service, albeit no modern ones. But, well, I shouldn't say they're ancient, to be fair. They're not. They have the 3 Francesco Caracciolo class, all built in the mid-20s. Francesco Caracciolo, Roma, and Regina Elena. 37,300 tons, 8 15-inch guns and 4 twin turrets. 14 6-inch, 8 dual-purpose 4-inch. They make 28 knots, 12-inch belt. They're well-armored. They're fairly well-armed, not exceptionally so for a modern capital ship, but not horribly obsolete. They're a little slow for the most modern battle cruisers, but there's nothing terrible about this design. They're just not brilliant in this universe. Just the fact of having them is honestly a major win compared to a lot of other countries at this point, though. Then Austria, Hungary, and France both have 0. France had some, but never really rebuilt after losing a bunch in a war, I believe. I think that was this campaign. Maybe I'm wrong. Austria-Hungary has 0. And that brings us straight up to the top 4 powers. Japan also has 0. Germany only has 2, being Hindenburg from 1917, which, okay, to be fair, this is just terribly obsolete. 10 13-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, but 2 of them are cross-deck firing. 14 6-inch and 12 3-inch guns. The 3-inch are dual purpose. 27 knots, 12-inch belt. The speed isn't actually that bad, but it's definitely not what a modern battlecruiser would need or have. The guns are inadequate in both caliber and layout for modern warfare. Any of my 6 battlecruisers would make absolute mincemeat of this ship with pretty much ease, even though the armor is still good. So overall, this ship just direly needs replacement. It's too old. Then they do it from 6 years later. Furst Bismarck, which has stood the test of time a lot better so far. 35,400 tons, 8 16-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 16 5-inch and 6 3-inch all dual purpose, 30 knots, 9.5-inch belt. Look, obviously, one of these 16-inch guns being in the middle of the ship between all the superstructure. Very weird. Not sure if that actually hurts their sightlines in-game or not for sure, but it's weird. Armor also is rather light, at least compared to what I build. Not compared to what Britain builds mostly, but compared to what I build. And compared to the Russian and Italian designs, to be sure. However, the armament is still pretty solid. The speed is good. The armor is just a little light. I wouldn't say this is a brilliant design either, but it's definitely stood the test of time a lot better than Hindenburg has. Overall, however, this is pretty clearly basically a legacy couple of battlecruisers Germany has. I imagine they'll scrap at least Hindenburg or Mackensen fairly soon. And it doesn't look to me like they have any plans to replace them. Which means that really, I mean, Russia has one. They had a battlecruiser force, but they don't anymore. Italy has 3. Germany has 2. Functionally, it's pretty much only the US and Britain that still have major battlecruiser squadrons. The US has 6, amounting to 244,000 tons, which makes us 1 less ship but heavier on average. These would be the 3 oldest are the Constellation class, built 1919 to 23, which does make them pretty dang old at this point. 36,300 tons, 8 16-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 25-inch, 12-inch belt, 2.5-inch deck, 28 knots. Are they as good as the very most modern battlecruisers that I've built? No. However, they're still about as good as, roughly similar to the Russian Chesma. They're just a little slower than I'd want a modern battlecruiser to be. Probably less deck armor for sure than I'd want a modern battlecruiser to have. But they're still well armed. They're still faster than battleships. They're only 2 knots faster than most cruisers are. Maybe the very latest cruiser generation is better, but not to a terrifying extent. Now, the fact that 3 of my ships are those is a little concerning, but it's not the end of the world. Then we have USS Congress, built in 31, 43,500 tons, 8 16-inch guns, 22 5-inch, 12-inch belt, 4-inch deck, 30 knots. You'll note immediately it does basically fix the issues that I have with the Constellations. Same primary, basically same secondary armament. They definitely could all use a dual-purpose refit. That's got to happen at some point. But 2 knots faster means it still keeps up with modern cruisers for the most part in 1940. Not maybe the very most modern ones, but only a knot or 2 slower. I haven't seen any cruiser that does more than 32 knots, so if it gets in range of this for very long, it's just dead anyway. It also has much better deck armor by a full 1.5 inches, which is honestly where most of the extra tonnage comes from. Congress is still a pretty terrifying battlecruiser. I think, although she has 1 less gun barrel than Chesma, I think most likely she beats Chesma in a gunfight. I suspect I have better deck armor. It's pretty even between Congress and Chesma, but Russia only has 1, and I have a lot more. It's clearly better than anything Italy or Germany has, to say the least. Honestly, the Constellation are also better than anything Italy or Germany has. And then very recently, we've completed USS United States and USS Essex. These are currently the last word in battlecruisers. 46,000 tons, 9 16-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, all forward armament. Yes, it looks weird on the graphic. I'm almost certain that it doesn't matter from a gameplay perspective. 24 5-inch dual purpose secondaries, 12-inch belt, 4-inch deck, makes 32 knots. These are every bit as fast as any cruiser, light or heavy, out there in the world. They are as well armored or more than any battle cruiser out there in the world. And I'm fairly sure as well armored. There are battleships that would beat these in a one-on-one combat, although not even all of them would. I'm fairly confident they're the best battle cruisers in the world as it stands. Now, Britain has 7 battle cruisers still in service, amounting to 229,000 tons, which is, of course, one more ship, but with significantly less average tonnage. That's in part because, although they don't have any hugely obsolete ships still in service, their oldest is HMS Queen Mary, which has 10 15-inch guns in two triple and 2 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 6 4-inch, makes 28 knots, 6.5-inch belt. But you may notice 2 things immediately. A, the twin turrets are in a cross-deck fire configuration, which is horrifying and made no sense even in 1917. 2, 6.5-inch belt literally has about half the armor that my modern, not even my modern, has half the armor that my older battle cruisers from around that time had. Britain absolutely went the historical route on its early battle cruisers, or even worse than. I don't know why fully, but it's bad. Several of these battle cruisers with the 6-inch belts have blown up pretty spectacularly in my wars with Britain. Generally speaking, they don't last. And they followed that with the 3 Invincible class: Invincible, Indomitable, and Princess Royal. 27,600 tons. 10 16-inch guns, 14 6-inch guns, 6 4-inch guns. 26 knots, 6.5-inch belt. Look, these are actually more flawed than Queen Mary. Yes, they have an extra inch of gun caliber, and they managed to do it on 500 tons less in the same year. You know what they did to do that? They took 2 knots off the top speed, which means that this is too slow to chase pretty much any cruiser afloat in the world, which eliminates the primary purpose of a battle cruiser, as originally designed, is, of course, to hunt down heavy and light cruisers. That's very much still what I expect my United States types to do, and even my Constellations are only, at 28 knots, a lot closer to a modern battle cruiser, to a modern cruiser, than this 26 knot thing is. And a 6.5-inch belt. The real danger for Invincible is that at 26 knots, she's really toying with the most modern battleships being faster than her, or the next generation of battleships that's about to be laid down being faster than her, at which point she'll be utterly worthless. I kind of think she's already pretty close to utterly worthless. Look, Britain has 3 battle cruisers that actually matter. Courageous and Flexible and Furious, all built in the early to mid-20s. 39,500 tons, 8 16-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 6 4-inch, make 30 knots and 11.5-inch belt. Unlike all their other battle cruisers, these are A, fast, B, well armored, C, have an armament that's not in a cross-deck firing configuration, and as a result, they are just hugely better than the other 4 British battle cruisers. However, if we assume, which I think is fair, that my 3 Constellations can handle the other 4 British battle cruisers, which I do think is fair, then my 3 more modern battle cruisers will pretty comfortably handle the 3 Courageouses. They absolutely do not. Neither Britain nor anyone else currently has an answer for the United States class. In many ways, these 2 are probably some of the very most dangerous ships in the entire world right now. Carriers might indeed render them obsolete pretty shortly, but I definitely think these still have a couple of years window in which they will be extremely dangerous to all those heavy cruiser forces that are still out there. And if we can escort them properly with our carriers, then there's no reason they should become obsolete for another 10 plus years. So that brings us to battleships, which pretty much everybody still has a good force of, except Russia. This is really why Russia is the smallest fleet in the world. They have exactly one battleship, Marat, 36,900 tons, 9 16-inch guns, 14 6-inch, 10 3-inch dual purpose, 13.5-inch belt, makes 23 knots. It's not that it's a bad battleship. It's quite a nice battleship, actually. Built in 1936, post-war. All forward armament, all 16-inch guns, 3 triples. Speed of 23 knots is very nice. Armor is pretty nice looking. There's nothing wrong with the Marat. It's just that it's just her. I mean, she's actually quite a nice battleship, but it's just Marat. All alone. Well, her and Chesma, I guess. Russia has 2 surface capital ships that aren't carriers. It's a problem, for sure. They are building Sverdlov, which at 44,000 tons is going to be a pretty good monster, although I have much heavier ships, but Russia has not recovered from the war, to say the least. Spain. Spain has 5 battleships. The problem is they all sort of barely qualify as battleships by modern standards. They have Almirante Oquendo and Alejandro I from 1917, which were 8 12-inch guns in 4 twin turrets. Weird kind of layout here. Where one's facing backwards, which means they didn't have enough super firing or something. 23 knots, 11.5-inch belt. I'm pretty sure in the past that I maybe said these were trying to be a battle cruiser or something with the 23 knots. Or maybe I said that about the other ones. Maybe I didn't say it about any of them, I don't know. In any case, these were bad in 1917. In 1940, they're execrable. All those 10-inch armed heavy cruisers that are running around would actually still lose to this in a slugging match. They would. The benefit of the 12-inch guns and the 12 inches of armor is just enormous. So even now, this would still shred all those heavy cruisers, but pretty much any other battleship in the entire world would just destroy these, just flatten them. I have battleships in service right now that have literally double, just shy of double the tonnage of these. They're so obsolete. They weren't that great even then, but they're so obsolete now. In the mid-20s, they built 3 more. The San Francisco de Paula class with Argonauta and San Telmo. 27,600 tons, 9 13-inch guns, 16 5-inch and 4 3-inch dual purpose, 12.5-inch belt, 23 knots. These were terrible even in the 1920s compared to their contemporaries. The actual design, the main problem is just this gun being in the middle instead of off the firing lines, terrible, etc. But the problem is it would have been a decent design in about 1908. By 1925, it was already abysmal. In 1940, it's useless. This is all 5 of the Spanish battleships are absolute cannon fodder. But I mean, to be fair, it's Spain. What do you expect? But yeah, absolute cannon fodder. Italy, 4 battleships amounting to 136,000 tons in their fleet, which is actually the second worst in the world. Slightly less tonnage in battleships than Spain. To be fair, they have all these battle cruisers, and the fact their battleships have much heavier average tonnage means, oh yeah. Although they only have 4 battleships and slightly less total tonnage, they would absolutely destroy Spain in a war. No question. They have Rey Umberto from 1921, 31,100 tons, 10 16-inch guns, 2 twin, 2 triple turrets, 16 4-inch and 4 3-inch dual purpose, 12-inch belt, 24 knots. quite a nice battleship all around, I would say. Fast, certainly for its era, but fast even now. Well armed, both then and now. Armor, I can't really criticize because the AI under armor so frequently that I'm just proud of them for having a good amount of armor. It could be better, but it's solid. Re Umberto is quite nice. They followed that with Emanuel Filiberto, 31,400 tons, 10 15-inch guns in 222 triple turrets, 18 5-inch, 4 3-inch, 11.5-inch belt, 26 knots. It's weird to me that they chose to drop the caliber from 16 to 15-inch in order to get more speed, because it's got like almost battlecruiser level speed. But it's definitely still not terrible as a battleship. It's a little more under-armored. The speed could come in handy, but if it's going to stick with the battle line with the others, then it doesn't really matter. It's not bad, though. Then Andrea Doria, which is sort of in the middle. Well, it's its own thing, basically. 34,800 tons, 10 15-inch guns, 2 twin, 2 triple turrets, 14 6-inch, 8 4-inch. Makes 25 knots, 13-inch belt, couple of spotter aircraft. It's very fast. The armament is not outstanding, but not terrible. Armor is actually quite good. So I would call it a pretty good battleship still. Not that mine wouldn't beat it, but it's pretty good. Especially for its weight class, because I just have bigger and heavier battleships. And finally, Julio Caesar. 38,600 tons, 10 16-inch guns, 14 6-inch, 12 4-inch, 27 knots, 12-inch belt, 2 aircraft. At this point, I mean, built 35, so this is quite a modern battleship, but it's, well, okay, for being built in 35, then it's just a modern, fast battleship. Probably this is one of the world's first things that you would really call a fast battleship. And it's fast. It's fast. It's well armed. Armor is not spectacular, but not terrible. It kind of depends on what the deck is, but can't really see that. I would assume it's not that great, to be honest, just based on what they managed to stuff into this tonnage, but hard to be sure. Italy is another country that could probably get away with short-ranged battleships, which might help them out a bit, too. Then after Italy, so overall, 4 pretty solid battleships. Not enormous or genius, but pretty solid. Mostly rather on the fast end, which is interesting. Then France has 6 battleships amounting to 203,500 tons. It is fascinating. There are 0 heavy surface capital ships. Now there's 1. In the whole world, there's 1 heavy surface capital ship under construction. Although there's also only 3 carriers under construction, which is just... everybody's currently pouring all their money into cruisers across the whole world for whatever reason. Anyway, France, 6 battleships amounting to 203,500 tons. The old Normandy from 1917, 12 16-inch guns, 30,800 tons, 22 knots, 9.5-inch belt. Speed was good then. Not so great now, but not terrible now. I mean, I have ships that are slow. Most of my battle line is still slower than that. Some of my battle line can't even do 21 knots because they need engine refits. So 22 isn't bad. If it can actually still do that, probably can't, but, you know, it's not bad. The armament is still good, even though it's a weird layout. Armor, however, is rather lacking, and I'm fairly certain was the undoing of all of her sister ships. When I'm pretty sure at some point we fought France. Am I crazy? Did we fight France? Yeah, we did fight France. Yes, we absolutely fought France. I can't remember if we ended up fighting... I feel like we didn't actually fight the bulk of the French fleet, but maybe we did at some point, finally. Irrelevant either way. They were nice, pretty nice capital ships, but the armor's a bit lacking. And that's pretty much still the case. To be fair, it's held together well for being 23 years old. Then the two Dantons, 32,200 tons, 9 16-inch guns, and 3 triple turrets, 16 6-inch, 4 3-inch, 21 knots, 11-inch belt. Still pretty well armed. Not as well, but pretty well. Speed is fine. Armor, a bit below average. Overall, not a bad battleship for its time. Definitely not as good as the latest offerings around the world, but... Well, and I think that even my contemporary Minnesotas are better, but not by a ridiculously huge margin. Then they had Paris, 34,500 tons, 9 16-inch guns, 16 5s, 4 3s, 12-inch belt, 24 knots. Still pretty well armed. Reasonably armored. Fast, which is good. To be fair, it's not Paris, it's Bretagne is the only, I think, survivor of that class. Apparently she fought us once. And then there are two more modern ships. Diderot from the late 20s. 39,700 tons, 9 16-inch guns, and 3 triple turrets, all forward. 14 6-inch, 6 3-inch dual purpose. Makes 23 knots with a 12-inch belt. This is very Nelson-esque, basically. Except a bit thin on the armor. So, I mean, really, a 12-inch belt is pretty much the standard I'm expecting from the AI, but you can absolutely put thicker armor than that on a battleship, and probably should. It all depends sort of what the deck is, to be fair, with these modern ships, and I don't know the answer to that. I'm just using the belt as a guide for what they're maybe putting in the deck, along with the tonnage. But obviously there's a lot of unknowns with these. Overall, I think this is a solid design, but not exceptional. And then Democracy is their latest from 1932, one-off, 34,100 tons, 8 16-inch guns in 4 twin turrets. Just the gun barrels are kind of short on those. Like, I feel like they're different, like an older style than what they used down here for some reason or something. Maybe they're more modern, actually, and I'm just not used to it. Anyway, 4 twin 16-inch turrets, 14 6-inch, 8 4-inch, 22 knots, 13.5-inch belt. This is basically a pretty run-of-the-mill modern battleship. Your 8 16-inch guns is about your basics for these days. 22 knots is pretty standard. Just like a knot faster than 21, but not enough to be fast. 13.5-inch belt is quite good, though, so it's well armored. I would say it's a good battleship, just not anything special. And then after France, Austria-Hungary has 5 battleships amounting to 159,200 tons, which is, to be fair, a good bit heavier on average than Spain, but it's not going to be anything too exceptional either. They have the two Erzherzog Karl and Kaiser from 1919. 30,000 tons each, 10 15-inch guns in 2 triple and 2 twin turrets, 16 6-inch, 4 3-inch dual purpose, 21 knots, 12-inch belt. Very standard speed and armor. Armament would be good, except for the weird placement of this turret, which I don't know if they didn't have super firing or if they just wanted to be weird for the sake of it, but that kind of ruins it a little. It's still not a terrible ship, certainly not for when it was built. Now, it's a little dated against any really modern thing. I mean, we do have to judge against the U.S. does not have a single battleship with less than 10 16-inch guns, which means that every battleship in the U.S. fleet would comfortably beat Erzherzog Karl in a gunfight. Especially as the U.S. also does not have any ships with less than a 14-inch belt out of its battleships. But I'm kind of judging against what I expect the AI to design, and I think against what the AI designs that this is pretty fair. They followed that with Budapest, which is 9 15-inch guns and 3 triple turrets, 31,600 tons, 16 6-inch, 4 3-inch, 23 knots, 12.5-inch belt. Fairly fast and well armored. Armament is not terrible, although they really could push it up to 16-inch, but it's not like 15-inch guns are pea shooters either. Um, there's nothing at all wrong with Budapest. She's just not going to be brilliant in modern warfare compared to the latest things other. Well, I mean, let's keep in mind in 1922, I had ships that were 10,000 tons heavier, but again, trying to judge relative to the AI. Our pod here, 31,700 tons, 9 16-inch guns, 3 triple turrets. I mean, it's basically very much the same design as Budapest, except a knot faster, half an inch less belt armor, and that's maybe literally it. The AI is very fond of building like ships that are more fairly described as subclasses than actually different classes, like these two. 100 tons different. Yeah. Their most recent offering from 1929 is Slavonian, 35,900 tons, 10 16-inch guns in 2 triple, 2 twin turrets, 25 knots, 12-inch belt, plus 14 6-inch, 6 4-inch guns. I mean, it's basically, it's not quite maybe a fast battleship, but it's faster battleship. If you want to call a fast battleship like 27 or 30 knots or something. But this is much faster than the 21 knot fleet standard that I have had for a while. It's well armed. The armor's not spectacular, but it's not awful. Yeah, no major faults with Slavonian either. It's just that they only have one of her. And arguably, she's their only really modern battleship in many ways. Oh, our pod has 16-inch guns. Okay, I did miss that. That's a pretty significant upgrade from Budapest, to be sure, for an extra 100 tons and in the same year, too. That's well done. Alright, so that's those. So that'll bring us to basically the big four. The big four all have much larger battleship fleets of 10 plus ships, unlike, France has 6 and they're the next. Japan has 11 battleships amounting to 352,000 tons at the moment, which puts them third in the world. Albeit they're behind Germany on total capital ships, but I did question the value of Germany's battle cruisers pretty hard, so. Now, the issue I did notice with Japan's ships when I had them on my side in the war 5 years ago is that some of them are rather dated. They have 2 Fujis, which 32,200 tons, 11 14-inch guns in 1 triple and 4 twin turrets, 26-inch, 4 4-inch dual purpose, 23 knots, and an 11.5-inch belt. It's fairly fast, but on the other hand, I'm pretty sure that from what I recall in the war, a bit of unique insight here, call it, but fairly sure these are coal-fired, so they can't actually keep that speed up for very long compared to oil-fired ships. The armor is below average. The armament is a lot of barrels, but 14 inch is not, it's 1940. 15 inch is pretty much the minimum at this point. And 16 inch is a lot more common around the world's fleets in this world. And they're in a sort of a baffling layout with 2 turrets, including the triple one, in the middle of the ship. So, not very impressed by the Fuji class. And then they have the Nagatos, Fuji and Hyuga, those. And then the Nagato and Asahi, which are very light for battleships that are still in service at 25,000 tons, 9 14-inch guns and 3 triple turrets, 16 6-inch, 6 4-inch, 20 knots, 10-inch belt. Yeah, these are outright just terrible, actually. There's a reason they're so light. It's because they're slow. They're below average speed. They're way below average armor for a battleship. And their armament is way below average for a modern battleship, too. These are pretty much cannon fodder for most modern 16-inch battleships, I would say. And it looks like the same can unfortunately be said of Hizen and Kaga. Hizen is 24,200 tons, but 8 14-inch guns in 2 triple and 1 twin turret, 16.6, 6.4, 20 knots, 9.5-inch belt. I don't even know why this is. Oh, it's 800 tons lighter than Nagato, yeah. 1 less gun barrel, half an inch less of belt armor. This is just worse. I don't even know why they built this. I assume they've been doing a lot of economizing, but yeah, no, Hizen is bad. And Kaga here, 21,700 tons, 814-inch, 222 and a twin turret, 10-inch belt. Okay, to be fair, I can't even really clearly see what's different between Hizen and Kaga, except Kaga actually has half an inch more of belt armor, despite being 2,500 tons lighter and built in the same year. Look, we have to assume, like, it's safe to assume that that means something big and important was torn out of Kaga. Whether it's like all of her deck armor, or she's short-ranged and low freeboard, or something. Something is wrong with her compared to Hizen. And Hizen was already bad. So this ship might be the worst battleship still afloat in the world right now, honestly. They did get their act back together, however, in the later 20s with Sagami, 33,700 tons, 9 15-inch guns and 3 triple turrets, 16 5-inch, 4 3-inch, 23 knots, 13-inch belt. She's better armed, not spectacularly, but better. She's fast, fairly, and she's well armored, fairly, so gun layout is still weird with one of the guns in the middle. The AI is really fond of that for some reason. But she's still a nice battleship overall, certainly compared to the other ones we've seen from Japan. And they then followed that in 1930 with Katori, 35,000 tons, 8 16-inch guns in an actually normal 4-twin layout, 14 6-inch, 8 4-inch, 22 knots, 13-inch belt. This is a pretty bog standard, like early 1930 type battleship. 8 16-inch guns, 13-inch belt, 35,000 tons. There's nothing wrong at all with this ship. Nothing spectacular about it either, but it's quite good all around. Probably actually oil firing at that point finally, which I think the Nagatos and probably all their 14-inch battleships are coal firing, which is problematic, yeah. Now they followed Katori with the behemoth that's currently the flagship of their fleet, the 1934 Suwo. This thing, to be fair, this is quite something. 48,200 tons, 10 16-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, 25-inch and 4 4-inch dual purpose, 12.5-inch belt, makes 30 knots and 3 spotter aircraft. This is... Okay, remember when I said Japan had no battle cruisers? Which they don't technically? This is basically a battle cruiser. This would actually be a terror for most of my battle cruisers, right? It's actually faster than my Constellation class battle cruisers, as well armored, better armed. This is a pretty terrifying ship all around. That said, there are, in the literal sense, battleships that will beat it. Let's assume they're going to be using it as a battleship and not as a battle cruiser, because that's how they've categorized it. It's actually worse as a battleship than it is as a battle cruiser. If this was a battle cruiser, it would be a real terror. As a battleship, yeah, okay, it's very fast. It's going to be stuck at the 23 knot speed or whatever of the rest of the Japanese battle line, right? Maybe 24 if she's with the most modern squadron. It's not going to be able to do 30 knots in combat practically most of the time. Unless she's out on her own. And in that case, still her armament is good. Her armor is pretty good. But for a battleship, her armor and armament are not that spectacular. I mean, I have numerous battleships with better. That way less also, I'm pretty sure. Because of the huge speed that she's got. But that speed is just hamstrung by the fact of her being a battleship that doesn't have a like the fact that she's a one-off battleship with no squadron of supporting battleships that can make anything like that speed. More realistic as an upgrade is probably something like what they followed her with, Kawachi and Yashima, which 37,400 tons, 10 16-inch guns in 2 twin, 2 triple turrets, 14 6-inch, 12 4-inch secondaries, 11.5-inch belt, 24 knots. Well armed, fast, but like the right sort of fast where hopefully they can build an actual squadron that can go 24 knots instead of 21 and not just a one-off should be a battlecruiser thing. Armor is a bit lacking though. I mean, this is a 1936 design. I'm going to be a little harsh on it. It depends what the belt is, but armor feels a little lacking on this. Overall, not hugely impressed by the Japanese. I mean, particularly the older 6 battleships with the 14-inch guns, which is literally more than half their fleet, are all garbage compared to any of the American battleships, including their American contemporary battleships, which were often 10 to 15,000 tons heavier. And their most modern battleships look better, but are really still not better than their American contemporaries. So, I don't know. I mean, Suo is a terrifying design, but the fact that she's a one-off and she's classed as a battleship and not a battle cruiser, I don't know about her value, really. Like, what's her role? If it were a battle cruiser, I would understand. But I'm pretty sure the game is just going to ram her into the line of battle at 24, 23 knots alongside all those other battleships. So, I don't know. Anyway, the big three, Germany, has 10 battleships in service, amounting to 330,400 tons. A bit less than Japan, maybe a bit heavier on average, but one less ship. Unfortunately, like Japan, except maybe even worse, 7 out of their 10 battleships only have 14-inch guns. Schlesien, Pommern, and Wittelsbach all hail from 1917, and 30,700 tons, 10 14-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, of which 2 are in a cross-deck firing arrangement. 14 6-inch, 8 3-inch, make 20 knots, 12.5-inch belt. Look, they're well armored-ish. They're a bit slow, less than average, even for the time. And their armament is pretty much woeful for most modern battleship standards. I wouldn't call them totally worthless. They definitely still need them in their line of battle if they're going to stand against Japan, let alone the US or Britain. But, I mean, honestly, it depends who they're planning against. If they're planning to fight Britain, then I guess they better keep them. If they're planning to fight Russia or France, then they'd probably be better to just scrap these and focus on building more 16-inch battleships, of which they only have 2. Then they have Mecklenburg, Wetten, Deutschland, and Braunschweig, all 29,100 tons, 12 14-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, of which for some reason none are super firing. 16 6-inch and 4 4-inch secondaries. 26 knots, but only an 8.5-inch belt. These might actually be worse. Look, yes, they're fast, to the point that at the time they were built, they were basically battle cruisers. However, they're too slow to be battle cruisers in the modern era. They're barely faster than modern battleships. And their armament, I mean, it's a lot of barrels, but the caliber is not good enough. And the armor is really not good enough. There are plenty of battle cruisers floating around right now that would just hands down beat these battleships. In both gun numbers and caliber, and even in armor, let alone speed. Like, for one of my United States class battlecruisers, this is just like meat. Nice, juicy steak of helpless battleship to eat. And then the real problem is, even for like a Pennsylvania class battleship, yes, it's 2 knots slower. If they got into a decent firing range, it would take the Germans too long to break contact, and with how little armor they have, they would just get shredded. The Mecklenburgs are not a good design. They really only have 2 modern battleships, Germany. Oldenburg from 1930, 43,600 tons, 8 16-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 8 4-inch dual purpose. She makes 27 knots and she has a 12-inch belt, so I mean, she almost like she's a fast battleship, yes. She almost feels like a battle cruiser. She's very comparable to like Congress or what are the British Courageous class battle cruisers, really. Little slower, 3 knots or something. Similar armor and armament, though. And that's really the rub, is she's got the same armor and armament of contemporary German or British and American battle cruisers, but is slower than them, which isn't impressive. However, all right. Circling all back around to the negativity here, she's still a pretty good battleship, all right? She's got sufficient armor. She's got sufficient armament, not spectacular in either regard. She's very fast, which could be a tactical advantage if she can avoid getting saddled to all those 14-inch ships. And to be fair, the 14-inch ships are actually mostly, well, these aren't, but the Mecklenburgs are pretty fast too. So as a leader for the Mecklenburgs, Oldenburg would actually do pretty well. It's just all very questionable in my mind. I don't know. And then they built Bismarck, 39,600 tons, 9 16-inch guns, all forward, 14 6-inch, 10 3-inch, 25 knots, 13-inch belt. I mean, she's actually well armored, relatively, quite well armored. Good armament, good speed. I mean, this is a nice battleship. It's definitely a nice battleship. It's just she's the only one of her class. And she's still not nicer than American contemporaries, some of which are more than 10,000 tons heavier still. So, yeah, I don't know. Germany and Japan's lines of battle, substantial, but just clearly inferior. Well, and I mean, you can see that by the fact that Germany has 2 ships less than me, battleships less than me, and is 200,000 tons behind on tonnage. It's that bad. So the U.S., second largest fleet in the world, yes. Mainly that's deficit in cruisers at this point, and perhaps destroyers. Yeah. Heavy cruisers and destroyers are really where the problem is there. The U.S. gun line is, I am 100% confident, the best in the world, full stop. It consists of USS Minnesota, Washington, and New Jersey of the Minnesota class. Yes, they are 22 years old. Similar to, say, how the Queen Elizabeths were in actual World War II. But better, because these are 39,200 ton ships, 10 16-inch guns, 24 5-inch. They make 21 knots. They have a 14-inch belt and a 3-inch deck. They're not fast compared to the most modern battleships, but they were pretty fast when they were built, and they still hold up reasonably well. They could use engine refits, though, actually, because they really only make 19 now, but such is life. They still do pretty good service at the back end of the gun line. They're still pretty much as well armed as any other battleship out there in the world. They're still probably pretty much better armored than any other battleship out there in the world. Maybe the deck is lacking compared to the most recent German and British designs. Maybe. I'm not even honestly convinced that it is, but possibly. Overall, I mean, this Minnesota, what, 10 16-inch guns, 14-inch belt? It still probably beats Bismarck. At the very least, it's very comparable to Bismarck, which was built 18 years later. That's kind of where we're at in terms of that at the moment. And then we followed those with USS Illinois, Ohio, North Dakota, and Montana, built 1927-28. 38,200 tons, actually 1,000 tons lighter, 10 16-inch guns in 2 twin, 2 triple turrets, 24 5-inch, 4 3-inch dual purpose. Now, both these classes do definitely need a refit for dual purpose armament, but They'll probably get it eventually. They make 21 knots, 14-inch belt, 4-inch deck. The only really fundamental difference between the Illinois and the Minnesotas is, I believe, an extra inch of deck armor, maybe a few other changes under the hood, and they managed to be 1,000 tons lighter. So the Illinois are just an all-around modest upgrade on the Minnesotas, we'll call it, incorporating about 10 years worth of tech, but not in a spectacularly heavier way. That said, I'm pretty confident the AI doesn't have any ships with more than 4-inch deck armor. I'd be surprised anyway. I think it's a fair bet that the Illinois would probably still be the best battleships in the world. Except for, does Britain have anything that's clearly better? Really, no. I honestly think the Illinois would probably still be the best battleships in the world, if not for the 5 ships of the Pennsylvania class, built 1933 to 36. USS Pennsylvania, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, and Wyoming. 52,200 tons, 12 16-inch guns, 24 5-inch. Do really need that dual-purpose upgrade, but 14-inch belt, 5-inch deck, 24 knots. The Pennsylvania class is currently the last word in battleships. There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that these are currently the most powerful battleships in the world. Very likely, they're still the most powerful ships in the world. It's currently 1940. It's sort of touch and go with carriers. Within, of course, the next 5 years, carriers are scheduled to get better. But that's not that certain in this game. Not a guarantee. We'll see how it goes. At the moment, the Pennsylvanias are still pretty much the kings of the ocean, and they've probably got a couple years left in which they will stay that way. And I have no doubt that they're the most powerful surface units currently alive. They're still faster than most of their contemporary or battleship rivals. There are some faster ones out there, but certainly none that have better guns and better armor. That said, that does bring us to Britain's fleet. They have the most battleships in the world, with 13, but they only amount to 428,100 tons, 100,000 less than the U.S. The oldest is Majestic, last of the Camperdown class, 33,200 tons, 12 15-inch guns in 2 twin, 2 triple turrets, 14 4-inch dual purpose. Makes 21 knots, 11.5-inch belt. Nothing wrong with Majestic. Well armed, reasonable speed. Armor, a bit below average. And not 16-inch guns either, but 12 15s is about equivalent to 10 16s, probably really. Well, as I said, it is kind of, it's not linear, it's closer to exponential. I forget what the actual formula is, but 16s have a bigger advantage over 15s than you might think. It really might be that 12 15s is more like 8 16s. But it's not a terrible armament or anything. Not a terrible ship, just a little old. HMS Renown, 32,700 tons, 10 15s and 2 twin, 2 triple turrets, 24 knots, 12-inch belt. Faster and better armored, but a little lighter on the armament, and, well, all of my ships would beat this in a gunfight, just... Not that it's terrible, but my Minnesotas would have no trouble beating it in a gunfight, yeah. What is terrible are probably the next 2 ships. Mars, built 1919, 30,100 tons, 12 14-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, 14 6-inch, 4 4-inch, 23 knots, 10.5-inch belt. Yes, it's a lot of gun barrels. They're 14-inch guns. They're not adequate for 1940. The 10.5-inch belt, significantly below average for a battleship. Not good enough either. It's kind of fast. Not that fast. Not enough to be worth the loss they've taken on it otherwise. Not a good ship. HMS Redoubtable, 23,000 tons, 8 15-inch guns, bewilderingly, in 2 triple and 1 twin turret, with the twin turret mounted amidships, 21 knots and a 10.5-inch belt. I said Mars was bad. This is really bad. The guns would have been adequate in a real-life 1940 ship, although would have been terribly laid out even in a real-life 1940 ship. In this world, not really adequate in a 1940 battleship. And in a battleship still in service in 1940. And certainly the armor is not even close to adequate, so really quite a poor ship. Now they followed that with the much more respectable HMS Hannibal. 34,200 tons, 10 16-inch guns in 2 twin and 2 triple turrets, 16 6-inch, 4 3-inch dual purpose, makes 24 knots, 11.5-inch build. A good armament, a good speed, a little light on the armor, but there's nothing fundamentally wrong with Hannibal. It's quite a nice ship. It was very nice, really, in 1922. It's not as nice now. What wasn't nice, even when they built it in 1923, are HMS Barfleur and Irresistible. Let me tell you, folks, this ship is very resistible. 23,300 tons, 6 16-inch guns in 3 twin turrets, one of which is mounted amidships, 18 5-inch and 4 3-inch dual-purpose guns, 23 knots, 9.5-inch armor belt. The speed is fine. The armament is terrible. The armor is woeful. This ship is very fragile for a battleship, and it's not even a glass cannon because it only has 6 gun barrels, and they're not some absurd caliber. They're just 16-inch. And they're laid out really poorly. I don't understand this class. I don't know why Britain built it. We know they could build this. Why did they then build this? It's terrible. It's not, I have no excuses for Britain on that one. I like Britain myself, but like out of game. But this is trash. And they then sort of proved again why would they build that by building HMS Revenge. 37,900 tons, 10 16-inch guns, 14 6-inch, 6 4-inch dual purpose. 26 knots and an 11-inch belt. The armor is a touch light, however, the armament is quite nice. The speed is very good, actually, basically to the point of being a fast battleship. And with how good its armor belt and armament are, I'll give it the credit of being a fast battleship and not some sort of weird abortive attempt at a battle cruiser. So I would say this is, again, a fairly nice battleship. Not spectacular. Still literally, most likely my Minnesota class would beat it in a gunfight, let alone my Illinois or Pennsylvania classes. But nonetheless, a pretty nice battleship. And with how heavy it is, well, no, but all that weight is in the speed. I will say it puts a lot of weight into speed for being a battleship. It's definitely less armored than contemporaries. Then they built HMS Collingwood in 1926. 33,400 tons, 9 16-inch guns and 3 triple turrets, 16 5-inch, 4 3-inch dual purpose, 24 knots, 13.5-inch belt. Fast, very well armored. The gun armament is good, just the layout is stupid. And it kind of depends. I'm not 100% sure how much this affects in-game effectiveness of the armament, but for sure, if this was a real ship, putting this gun in between the 2 bits of superstructure would be just terrible. I'm pretty sure that even in-game, it's just not as good as being super firing would have been. I have no idea why the AI is so fond of that sort of design. However, they did follow it in 1929 with HMS Hood and Bulwark. 39,900 tons, 9 16-inch guns, 14 6-inch, 6 4-inch, 23 knots, and a 15-inch belt. And to be fair, these two are excellent battleships. Like a bit faster than the previous standard without being putting too much into speed. A good armament, comparable to my ships at least, and a very good armor belt. These are actually about the only British battleships that I'm legitimately concerned about in some regards. These are the first British battleships that I think probably could beat a Minnesota in a one-on-one combat. I place a pretty good amount of value on armor, especially for battleships, and I think that's generally been borne out by the sort of results we've had against the AI, whose battleships tend to be pretty damn fragile, whereas ours have a much better chance, it seems to me, of staggering back into port still afloat even after taking a beating. These, however, actually the first AI ships I've seen that are really, really well armored. So good for them. More recently, they've built the Albion class, HMS Albion and Repulse in 1936, 38,600 tons, 9 16-inch guns, 3 triple turrets all forward, 14 6-inch, 10 3-inch, 24 knots, 13-inch belt. These are still good, but they feel like a kind of a step backwards from the hoods, and I'm not quite sure why. They're 1,300 tons lighter, but they're built 7 years later. Weight-saving tech should pretty much make that difference. But they're 1 knot faster and apparently have 2 inches less of armor belt. Now, I can only hope they have a thicker deck and probably other improvements under the hood. So I'll say they're probably maybe about equal to the hoods. I'm not actually convinced that they aren't slightly worse, though. They're still good, though. They're still a good battleship. The 4 latest British battleships are all quite nice. Collingwood, Revenge, Hannibal, even like Redoubtable. No, Redoubtable not. Hannibal, Renown, and Camperdown are all pretty nice. They've got about 4 out of the 13 that are just terrible. Like, that are really not good. And then the rest, I would say, just average a little bit worse than our ships. And they really have nothing that can answer the 5 Pennsylvanias. I'm confident that none of their ships have more than 4 inches of deck armor, but... And it's very possible that none of them have more than 3, but... They're not terrible nonetheless. And finally, that brings us over to the ships that are now becoming the kings of the ocean. The aviation wings. Russia had a very large aviation wing, and to their credit, they've actually rebuilt it some since the end of the war, I believe. They do still have no less than 5 aviation, seaplane carrier type things. 2 of them built since the end of the war, which between them carry a total of, 32, 46? I don't know, math. I'm a history major. 30, 66, 82. 82 aircraft. Don't comment if I'm wrong, just let me believe that I was right. A total of 82 aircraft, which is about, like, a solid carrier's worth, so not bad, but all dispersed into little penny packets. I can't think any of them carry enough bombers to be really, it's 1940. Seaplane carriers are a little passé. I can't think any of these carry enough aircraft or modern enough aircraft. Well, and that's the thing, too. None of them have flight decks. So it's safe to say that all of them are pretty much operating like patrol aircraft or something only, probably. I'm fairly sure. And so, yeah. Maybe? I don't even know if you can operate... Maybe you can operate dedicated patrol aircraft. You might only be able to operate float plane scouts from seaplane carriers. I'm fairly sure you can't operate, like, fighters or proper bombers from seaplane carriers in-game. So... I don't fully understand the purpose of having all these, other than that they're really cheap. But they do have 4 fleet carriers, 4 light carriers. The light carriers being Zijguli, Itil, Baltia, and Baltia of 1 class, which are 10,500 tons, 28 knots, 30 aircraft apiece. Other stuff like gunnery and AA is maybe important, but hard to. Well, it's actually pretty easy to exactly compare because it's very simplified, but I don't have hard figures on what everybody should have. Everybody just pretty much crams the most that they can on, so it pretty much is just a factor of the size of the ship at some point, to some extent. Anyway, 28 knots, 10,500 tons, 30 aircraft. And then they've built Yake, which has 10,800 tons, 28 knots, 31 aircraft. Extra 300 tons for 1 aircraft doesn't actually seem like a great trade-off to me. They maybe have made some other changes under the hood, so to speak. But these did see action against us and survived. Good for them. Sitchguli here managed to bomb Yorktown and 2 battleships, in fact, and only took 1 bomb in return from Hornet. Itil managed to hit Yorktown and a battleship. Baltia was somehow not engaged ever. Yake managed to get hit by a torpedo from Hornet, but survived. Anyway, yeah. I mean, honestly, these light carriers were fairly effective. They do a good job of boosting the numbers of the enemy fleet. I should probably build some. The U.S. has 0 light carriers, by the way, as compared to everyone else in the world has between 4 and 7. However, we have the most and heaviest fleet carriers. It's kind of been my thinking that the U.S. probably has enough budget to just build up a really dominant fleet carrier force. I'm going to go through just the whole naval air arms altogether, though. I'm not going to really separate. Russia has 4 and 4. That amounts to 120 aircraft flying off of light carriers, or 121 technically. Plus, their 2 older surviving carriers, Kazan and Baku, 17,900 tons, 28 knots, 54 aircraft apiece. No particular armor of note. They might have deck armor. Both of them came through the war pretty much unscathed, I think. Yeah. Apparently this one even engaged Asagumo with gunfire at some point. That's nice. Oh, you know, I probably do know when that happened, too. That was in the middle of the night. Anyway, these are solid carriers. They did well in the war with us. Just had the bad luck to get too close to our battlecruisers at some point, which really reinforced my belief that battlecruisers are still worth something. It's been another 5 years and carriers are moving very... I mean, yes, aircraft are developing very fast, but still. Especially at night or some such. And radar at this moment is actually a bigger boost for surface ships than it is for carriers, really. It will let surface ships, A, detect things in the night when carriers don't really operate effectively yet, and B, detect incoming aircraft early. Neither of which really helps carriers at all. There's not really much any aircraft-mounted radar yet, so radar has actually, in some ways, kept the pendulum even, at least, maybe, with the further development of aircraft. Anyway, most recently, they've built Leningrad and Gorky, which are modern 29,000-ton, 29-knot, 86 aircraft fleet carriers, which means Russia has altogether something on the order of, call it, well, this is 8 more, this is 8 less, so call it 180, 290, 300, no, 411 aircraft between their total carrier striking force. Not bad at all. If we compare to the very standardized U.S. carrier force, we're basically calling it, we got 240, 320, so we got 560, and the Russians had 411, so it's not bad at all. It's still pretty comparable to our carrier striking force, to the point that it could come down to luck. Same number of overall platforms, just they've got light carriers where we have fleet carriers. Anyway, after Russia, Spain. Spain's carrier force, as you might expect, is not spectacular. Honestly, it's quite impressive that they have one at all. And they do. Four Miguel de Cervantes class light carriers: Miguel de Cervantes, Isla de Luzon, Isla de Cuba, and Almirante Cervera, with 31 aircraft apiece, 11,500 tons, 27 knots, plus Alfonso the 12th and Alfonso the 13th, which surely people just call these like 12 and 13 in service or something, but 21,800 tons, 30 knots, 61 aircraft. All told, the Spanish loft about what? 120, 120, 126 air, no, 246 aircraft. Not bad. Certainly not bad for being Spain. It's hard to say. You don't really see the AI screw up carrier designs as such, so I don't have too much commentary to give on these. Like, actual carriers do have a lot of nuance. Probably they do in game too, to some extent, but I mean, they have slight variations in speed. Probably not very relevant considering they're far away from enemy ships for the most part. The only thing that's really worth noting from what we can see on this page is mostly how many aircraft they've got, and it would be worth noting if they had any major hangar or flight deck armor, but we can't really see that, I don't think, anywhere, so. Spain's got about, what did I just say, 246 aircraft. Not a huge force, but quite respectable for them being Spain, to be fair. And then Italy. Italy has 4 fleet, 6 light carriers, and is building another one of each. So, I mean, quite a potent force, really. They've got the 2 old Sirio and Persio from the early 30s, 13,200 tons, 30 knots, 32 aircraft apiece. Then Vega from 33, 12,900 tons, 30 knots, another 32 aircraft. And then Sagittario and Andromeda from quite recently with 14,200 tons, 30 knots, 30 aircraft. So they actually have 5, no, 6. One. Oh, I overlooked Centauro. 10,700 tons, 28 knots, 28 aircraft. That's their earliest experimental light carrier from the 20s. Altogether, that gives them about 60, 120, 182 aircraft from their light carriers, plus they've got one experimental carrier from the 20s, Astore, 17,000 tons, 28 knots, 48 aircraft. Not great anymore, to be fair. Definitely low on aircraft for its tonnage, even. Because we have, well, 21. Yeah. It's just light on tonnage for a fleet carrier, let's put it that way. And then they have the more recent 18,300 ton Aquila, Sparviero, and Deroni with 18,300 tons, 27 knots, 60 aircraft. So that amounts altogether to 180, 228, plus, what did I say for the other part of the fleet? 60, 120, 182, 228, and 182 makes, what, 410? About the same number of aircraft as the Russians overall, which they don't have any really big modern carriers. Their Aquilas are being built in the mid-30s, still only carry 60 aircraft, which isn't that spectacular. On the other hand, they're really operating in an environment where land-based aircraft are pretty dominant overall. I mean, it's the Mediterranean. Anything Italy actually needs to fight in, they really should just have air bases at, to be honest. And I'm a huge Navy proponent, but like, it's the Mediterranean. The value of carriers is a bit limited, even in 1940. Not that the British didn't make very good use of them in World War II, so Italy would definitely have benefited from having a couple, but I can't blame them for not going all in on carriers necessarily. Certainly not when they have as many aircraft as Russia does. Anyway, France. France has gone a bit light with 3 fleet, and 7 light carriers. Everybody does have aviation ships. I'm just kind of ignoring them because I really question whether they have much of any practical combat value in the modern era. Well, they do scouting, but that's about all they do, you know? I'm fairly sure. Anyway, France has Armanches and Dixmude from the early 20s, 12,400 tons, 26 aircraft, and 27 knots. Then Louvre and Souverain, built surprisingly far apart for one class, but 14,500 tons, 30 knots, 30 aircraft. Then Sphinx, Field de Paris, and Protector, the three modern quote-unquote ones from the early 30s, 11,500 tons, 28 knots, 28 aircraft. All a little small and low on aircraft for fleet carriers, or light carriers, actually. I mean, I'll round basically to 30 because I refuse to do the math, but well, it's 7 times 30, 210, but then minus 6, 10, 14, so 196 aircraft altogether on those. And then besides that, they only have Bern from 28, 17,700 tons, 29 knots, 47 aircraft. And then Joffre and Lafayette from 34 and 37, 28,800 tons, 28 knots, 58 aircraft. Even these not that big for fleet carriers, not from the 30s. It's possible, maybe. They're pretty heavy. It's possible that they have deck or hangar armor or something, but I can't confirm that they do. I'd be a little surprised maybe if they did. They are pretty heavy, though, actually. I mean, I snuck 80 aircraft onto 31,000 tons. For the French to only have 60 on just less than 60 on a couple thousand tons less, either they're well behind in tech, or maybe they did put some extra armor on their ships, which is possible. Even if they did, it's 170, it's what, about 360 total aircraft, roughly. So less than both Italy and Russia. Not a terribly impressive French fleet. They're definitely short on fleet carriers. Considering they also have no battle cruisers, I kind of question, like, the French fleet's just not doing very well. Haven't really, I mean, the war we fought with them is 15 years ago now, but they have not really recovered. It's also just their economy at this point. Their budget is not high. In fact, it's only bigger than Spain and Austria-Hungary. Speaking of which, Austria-Hungary actually has 4 fleet, 4 light carriers. I don't really know why, but they've got Muve, Falke, Cormorant, and Seadler from the mid-20s, 8,100 tons, 24 knots, 24 aircraft. Slow, even by early light carrier standards, and small, too, really, but why does this one allegedly have a wildly different armament? And it's the same class. Did they just rebuild it wildly for some reason? Maybe. This one carries an extra 2 aircraft and has, like, more than double the armament of all the others for some reason, apparently. Or my spies are just off their rocker. I do have literally no intel stationed to Austria-Hungary, so someone may have misfiled a report or something. We'll assume they have 96 aircraft probably there. Then they have the carrier Condor from the 20s. 14,600 tons, 30 knots, 24 aircraft. I assume... Well, I don't know. I hope this was a conversion from something. The fact that it only has a 2-inch belt kind of suggests to me that it isn't. But I have no idea how they built a 15,000-ton carrier with only 24 aircraft. If it isn't a conversion from something. I mean, these are 8,100 tons and contemporary and have 24 aircraft, so... I mean, this is also much faster. 30 knots costs a lot of weight. But it's not worth having so few aircraft, so... Condor's a real compromise design. Something's wrong with it, I don't know. Don't know what, but something is. Then they have Prague and Krakow, 20,600 tons, 30 knots, 65 aircraft. That's a lot more respectable. and Graz, 31,300, no, 21,300 tons, 30 knots, 66 aircraft. Altogether, that's only about 195 plus 125. So what about 320 aircraft? I think that's less than France. I can't remember exactly what France had now, but it's definitely less than Italy and Russia. Not a super impressive carrier force from the Austro-Hungarians. Condor especially I really question, not sure what's up with that. And their light carriers are kind of small. But their three fleet carriers from the 30s are pretty nice, so it's starting to come together maybe. Then after them, we have the big four. Japan. Japan does have a very nice carrier force. Actually, probably, the third largest in the world altogether. Britain has lagged a little, for the record. They're the fourth largest carrier force in the world. Anyway, Japan has 6 fleet, 7 light carriers. The light carriers being right, although none of them ever put in any appearance in the war that we fought with Russia, for whatever reason. A lot of their battleships did, but none of the carriers. Anyway, the light carrier Ryujo from 23, 11,600 tons, 29 knots, 29 aircraft, still pretty nice. And then Chitoshi, Taiyo, Shoho, Chuyo, and Ryuho, all of the same class from the mid-20s. 14,500 tons, 30 knots, 30 aircraft. And most recently in the early 30s, Junyo, 13,200 tons, 30 knots, 32 aircraft. Basically managed to have, altogether, more or less 210 aircraft from light carriers. And then Zuiho from 23, 16,100 tons, 30 knots, half an inch of belt, 29 aircraft. Maybe this is a converted armed merchant cruiser. That might be what Austria-Hungary's was too. That would kind of explain the lack of armor combined with the lack of aircraft capacity. But either way, this is a very early experimental fleet carrier, and not a good one, obviously. They followed that with Hosho and Hiryu in the early 30s, which 18,300 tons, 28 knots, 53 aircraft. Very nice graphical design. These are nice carriers. Not very large carriers, but respectably large. And then most recently, they've built Soryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku just in 3639, which 21,600 tons, 30 knots, 71 aircraft. These are very nice fleet carriers. Modern speed, large capacity, dual purpose guns, etc. So you take the 210, 240, 340, 210 aircraft from these alone, 550-ish. That brings the Japanese air arm to, which is definitely the largest out of what we've seen. The light carriers are very nice. The Hoshos aren't that great, but the Soryus are very nice carriers. Zuiho is definitely the black sheep of the fleet at this point. I would assume they'll scrap her relatively soon, because she's got to cost a lot of money compared to, it would literally be better to just have an extra light carrier compared to this, you know? Anyway, Germany actually has, I think, by numbers, the equal largest fleet with Japan. Japan's, though, adds up to, about 220,000-ish? Britain's is 220,000-ish? Germany's is almost 250,000. I believe Germany has the biggest carrier fleet in the world by tonnage right now, which maybe kind of makes up for how weak their battleship and battlecruiser forces are. It comes out to 6 fleet, 7 light carriers. Their early light carriers are Rhine and Weser, which they're building another fleet carrier too. Look at that. Are Rhine and Weser, 8,100 tons, 22 knots, 24 aircraft. Now, obviously, these are flawed compared to modern light carriers. They're very slow. Enough that it really is notable at this point. A couple knots between carriers usually doesn't make a difference, but only making 22 knots is going to be quite noticeable. These are really going to struggle to keep up, with any sort of cruiser operations or anything is the problem. In fact, even modern battleships are going to start to really outpace those, so they're going to have to go pretty soon. However, they did shortly follow with Ausonia, Salzach, Jade, Schwentin, and Wiels class of 5, 14,200 tons, 30 knots, 30 aircraft, very nice in uniform, very respectable in every way. Altogether, that amounts to 180 plus 228 aircraft from the light carriers. And then their fleet carrier force, very much two groups. In the mid-20s, they built Graf Zeppelin, Peter Strasser, and von der Tann, which are 16,800 tons, 29 knots, only carry 42 aircraft, which is, of course, awfully light for a fleet carrier, really. Certainly in 1940, and I don't think it's because they're armored or anything either. However, in 1936, they completed Europa, Grafspee, and Seydlitz. And these are 31,400-ton monsters that make 31 knots and carry 88 aircraft apiece. Now, these bad boys, these are some of the most powerful carriers in the world right now, probably. Maybe even the most powerful. It's a lot of aircraft they carry. They might even have enough tonnage to have a little bit of armor. Well, probably not, because they're similar to the American Enterprises, and actually carry more aircraft, so I'm guessing they're pretty thinly armored, to be sure, but a lot of aircraft capacity. So that amounts to, what, 180, 228, 270, 350, and then another, 620 aircraft or something like that. So I think it's just a bit more than Japan overall. Yeah. Quite a heavy force they've got. Now, okay, to be fair, that number of tonnage, it is still, I think they have the most, but Derflinger will be included in that tonnage. They are building a new carrier, which is 23,700 tons, so I assume it's lighter than the Europas, maybe more like a 60 aircraft. Anyway, the U.S. fleet, alone out of everybody, has no light carriers, but is now up to 8 fleet carriers, which is the most out of anybody, and just only very slightly less tonnage than Germany, Britain, Japan. These are 4 Langley class from 1930, USS Langley, Wasp, Yorktown, and Hornet, 21,400 tons, 30 knots, 60 aircraft. And then these were followed in 1938-39 by USS Enterprise, Franklin, Bunker Hill, and Hancock of the Enterprise class, 31,400 tons, 30 knots, 80 aircraft. And they do have uninch of flight deck armor, which I believe the Langleys didn't have, so they're not super well armored, but they're a bit armored. And that's 320 plus 240, 560 aircraft altogether. So what did I just say Germany had? 610. We're just slightly behind the likes of Germany, but not much. And I expect as soon as our little cruiser revamp is done, probably more carriers will be on the way, just because that's obviously the wave of the future. For now, the U.S. carrier arm is not dominant in the way its surface capital ship arm is, but I'm fairly confident in it nonetheless. Finally, we do have Britain. Britain is actually a little bit behind, maybe arguably, with 4 fleet carriers and 7 light carriers in service, which is, it's barely more than, it is more tonnage than Italy, but it's not spectacular. It's less than Germany and Japan for sure. They have HMS Biter and Avenger from the early 20s, 11,200 tons, 29 knots, 29 aircraft. Then HMS Dasher and Charger from the late 20s, 13,900 tons, 30 knots, 30 aircraft. Battler from 32, 15,600 tons, that's 30 aircraft. Not actually sure why that's so much heavier. Maybe it's armored. And then HMS Audacity and Attacker completed very recently. 10,600 tons, 28 knots, 31 aircraft. All of them ultimately pretty standard light carrier stuff. They've all make close to 30 knots. They all carry close to 30 aircraft. I don't know why Battler has so much tonnage. Maybe she is armored. But altogether, it's about 210 aircraft off of those 7 platforms. Then they have HMS Eagle and Argus, which are 18,600 tons, 26 knots, 54 aircraft from the 20s. Not bad. They carry a respectable number of aircraft. They are a little slow for modern carriers, though. They could keep up with battleship operations, but not really cruiser operations. They followed her in the early 30s with HMS Glorious, 19,800 tons, 30 knots, 56 aircraft. The main upgrade being the speed. And then most recently, they have completed what is currently the biggest and most powerful carrier in the world, HMS Hermes, clocking in at 37,400 tons, 30 knots, 101 aircraft. Which she is the first carrier to break the 100 aircraft barrier, and is definitely the highest capacity in the world right now. Probably, effectively, that makes her the strongest, yeah. Or the most powerful, or however you want to put it, although obviously there's all kinds of nuances of aircraft types and so on, which would be hard to compare exactly. We only have very vague data on those. But anyway, that takes them to about 210, 320, 380. Yeah, I'm just thinking out around 210, 320, 380-ish, just be generous, 490. Well, it's still, even with Hermes, a fair bit less than what Germany or Japan has. And I believe we had 560, right? Yeah. So Britain's carrier arm is lagging a bit, despite HMS Hermes. Now, I see HMS Formidable, her sister ship, is due to be finished soon, which will bring them up to 590, which will exceed us slightly. But even then, well, they don't have any follow-ups coming, so overall, the U.S. has, I would say, definitely the most powerful surface capital ships in the world. It's actually very even right now between the big 4 powers, the US, Germany, Britain, and Japan, in terms of carrier strength. And we are very much at the dawn of the proper carrier era now, so that could get interesting. The US probably will have the best light cruiser force once the Cincinnatis are finished in a couple months, but it's definitely lagging behind in heavy cruisers. I would say that we have the best destroyers, but a couple of other countries have significantly more. So that's maybe something to work on. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the position the U.S. fleet is in. Definitely, we should win any war on the surface. Carriers are a bit touch and go, but we have a couple of years before they really dominate anyway, especially if people don't build a ton more of them. So time will tell. I'm still hoping to provoke a war with Britain within sort of the period of historic World War II. And we'll see what happens. Radar is starting to be a thing right about now, but I don't really have any data on it, except for maybe... Do I have any note, like... Radar and electronics is my research advantage, incidentally. We just have notes on how advanced everyone's tech is, which, like, we know Britain has radar. I haven't heard of anybody else having it, but it might. I'm not sure we get individual messages for everybody, just for the first power that starts to get it. So overall, I'd say we're in a pretty good position. But time will tell in the 1940s. In the meantime, thank you everybody very much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you did enjoy the video. I hope you have a nice day. This is Sea Lord Janda, signing off.